In the far northern reaches of the kingdom of Krasis, endless fighting consumed the land as Duke Elian of the Border Marches stood atop his fortress, stunned by the nightmare unfolding before him. Where an ocean of corpses advanced relentlessly, their decaying ranks moving in unison while a toxic haze rolled forward and choked the sky itself. As panic spread among the defenders, Elian's gaze was drawn upward, and his blood ran cold when he saw a colossal warrior clad in blackened armor towering above the undead horde. The infamous Death Knight, Durian, whose presence alone was said to spell ruin. A foe so terrifying that even the greatest knights alive rarely survived an encounter with him. Realizing that their forces were hopelessly outmatched, and that retreat would only hasten the fall of the kingdom once the weakening walls and gates collapsed, Elian steeled his resolve and chose defiance over despair, ordering his men to stand firm, even if it meant dying where they stood. At that critical moment, a streak of red cut across the battlefield as a single mounted figure burst forward, his scarlet cloak blazing against the gray ruin like a burning flame, drawing stunned attention from every defender watching from the walls. The rider was soon recognized as Urin Rox, the famed daggermaster from the Southern Marquis, and shock turned to disbelief as he abandoned his horse and hurled himself straight into the heart of the undead army, his twin blades moving like flashes of light. What seemed like reckless folly became something else entirely when Urin closed in on Durian and struck, his daggers tearing cleanly through the Death Knight's armored form as if it were nothing more than mist, leaving Elian frozen in awe as the impossible unfolded before his eyes and the hopeless battle suddenly tilted toward an unexpected future. Urin's twin blades cut through the sky like flashes of lightning, striking with flawless accuracy as every hit caused the undead to crumble, their twisted forms breaking apart and fading into drifting black mist, leaving the watching soldiers frozen in shock as rumors spread that he had to be some sacred champion blessed by higher powers. The idea almost amused Urin, because he knew the truth was far less noble, as he was simply someone who seized any power he could find, whether it strengthened his flesh or hardened his soul. Half a year earlier, his life had been nothing like this, beginning with his sudden awakening in a strange bedroom where confusion clouded his thoughts and his eyes fell on a servant rushing toward him. Her beauty caught his attention immediately, though the weapon at her side only deepened his confusion, and before he could make sense of the situation, she quietly checked on him and left to summon religious help. Still unsteady, Urin dragged himself out of bed and approached a mirror, only to feel his heart sink when the reflection revealed not his familiar fit body, but an overweight boy with soft features and unruly hair staring back at him. Certain it had to be some kind of illusion, he collapsed onto the bed again, convinced that falling asleep would restore reality. Instead, a calm-looking priest soon appeared, relieved to see him awake, only for another man to storm in moments later, radiating fury and disgust at Urin's existence before being pushed aside by the priest's firm intervention. Afterward, the priest carefully checked Urin's injuries and noted how quickly his battered body was recovering, while Urin remained silent, overwhelmed by the weight of it all as he tried to understand the unfamiliar body, the hostile faces, and the strange new life that had suddenly become his own. The Lord's expression warped with fury as his anger exploded, filling the room with crushing pressure and leaving Urin stiff with shock while the man condemned him for surviving when death would have been preferable, accusing him of committing an unforgivable act against his own fiancée and branding him no better than a savage animal. He continued without mercy, reminding Urin that at 19 he was already a disgrace, useless and weak, especially when compared to his younger brother who had already awakened his aura, while Urin himself remained overweight and helpless, unable to understand a single word being thrown at him as the priest stood nearby in tense silence. Though the man's tone cooled slightly, the chill within it only deepened as he laid down his demand that once healed, Urin would go and seek forgiveness from the woman he had wronged, a revelation that left Urin stunned when he learned she was not only his fiancée, but already his wife, Ilya, and that refusal would bring severe punishment personally delivered by the Lord himself. Terrified, Urin hurriedly agreed, earning only another glare and a final warning about staining the family's honor before the man turned to leave, sending Urin's thoughts spiraling as fragments of unfamiliar memories collided, forcing him to realize with growing horror that he now occupied the body of Wellington Rox. The accidental utterance of that name brought the Lord to an abrupt halt, and in the next instant, rage returned full force as Urin was struck hard and thrown aside, the priest desperately intervening while the furious man stormed out without looking back. Left sprawled on the floor with his face burning and heart racing, Urin clung to denial, convincing himself it had to be some kind of dream, yet hours later, awakening alone in the silent room. Every attempt to force himself awake failed, leaving him with the terrifying truth that this was no illusion and that he was trapped inside someone else's life with no clear escape in sight. A woman slipped into the room with quiet steps and announced that he had finally regained consciousness, causing Urin to blink and instinctively call her Aaron, which she confirmed with a nod before growing confused when he only stared at her in silence. Struggling to piece things together, Yurin carefully asked if he had been knocked out because of what happened with Lady Ilia, earning a slight frown from Aaron as she confirmed it while wondering why he was suddenly speaking so formally. Letting out a tired breath, Yurin pressed further, only to learn that it was far worse than he imagined, as he had attempted to force himself on Lady Ilia and was beaten unconscious by her in response, a truth that made his blood run cold as panic seized him. Aaron could only watch in confusion as Yurin clutched his head and spiraled, his thoughts racing as denial shattered and a horrifying realization settled in, that this world was real and far worse, because he had awakened inside his own web novel, not as the hero, but as the pathetic villain doomed to die miserably. The absurdity of it all pushed him to the edge as he ranted about how this was not some illustrated fantasy, leaving Aaron completely lost and unable to follow his strange words. Despair quickly replaced shock as Yurin recalled exactly who this body belonged to, a talentless noble who abused his status, chased women, drank endlessly, tormented the protagonist, lost his fiancée, and eventually died like garbage in a forgotten alley. Collapsing back onto the bed, Yurin felt the weight of his fate crush him as he stared at his soft, unfamiliar hands, realizing with bitter certainty that he truly had become that fool and had no idea how he was supposed to survive in a brutal world when he did not even understand the limits of his own body. There was at least one small comfort, as Yurin clearly remembered every hidden detail, rare treasure, and future incident from the story that had yet to unfold, meaning that with careful planning, he might actually avoid a horrible end. With renewed resolve, he forced himself upright, only to discover that his bulky body refused to cooperate, his balance completely off as he nearly tipped over before steadying himself. Aaron hurried over in concern, asking if he was all right, while Yurin bitterly admitted that he was far from fine as he struggled just to remain seated. At that moment, something unusual drew his attention, and he noticed a faint, glowing panel hovering beside Aaron, so clear that no amount of blinking could make it disappear, displaying words that listed abilities such as Swift Sword, Clear Mind Mirror, and Aura Adaptation. Shocked, Yurin realized he was staring at what looked like a status display, while Aaron, unable to see anything, reacted only to his strange behavior and questioned him with a tilted head. Panicking, Yurin brushed it off as a moment of confusion and sent her away, watching until she quietly exited the room. Once alone, his focus returned to where the screen had been, and he muttered to himself that those abilities clearly marked Aaron as a high-level knight, before noticing another detail that made him groan, a tiny meter labeled Affinity, sitting at 0. The implication made his head ache as he wondered if this world now ran on relationship values like a game, and whether all his past gaming habits had somehow cursed him. Shaking it off, he decided there were far more urgent matters to confirm, and he turned toward the mirror, demanding to see his own information. Almost instantly, a bright panel appeared before him, revealing a skill called Eye of Creation and a technique known as Four Heavens of the Tang Clan, causing his exhaustion to vanish as excitement surged through him. Even without fully understanding their true power, Yurin knew one thing for certain, that this weak-looking body might be hiding a terrifying potential capable of changing his fate entirely. The moment Yurin saw the name Four Heavens of the Tang Clan, recognition struck him hard, as it was a technique pulled straight from a wuxia webtoon he loved, one made unforgettable by a powerful heroine who had left a deep impression on him. In that story, the Tang Clan was feared and respected for their expertise in poisons, clever mechanisms, and lethal concealed weapons, making the skill's appearance here feel almost unreal. The thought that he might actually be able to master such an art filled him with excitement, because if it truly functioned the same way, staying alive in this dangerous world no longer seemed impossible. The setting around him felt bizarre, like a medieval realm of knights and magic that had somehow absorbed the rules of martial arts fiction. Yet the strange combination only worked in his favor. If this ability lived up to its reputation, Yurin could rise far above the image of a helpless noble that everyone despised. For the time being, however, he chose caution over haste, deciding it was wiser to observe, learn, and prepare before risking anything that could get him killed. Elsewhere within the mansion's corridors, Duke Wellington strode forward until Aaron hurriedly called out to him, causing him to pause and ask whether his son had finally regained consciousness. Aaron answered with a respectful bow, explaining that while the young master was awake, his state was far from stable, as he had nearly collapsed just trying to stand and still appeared frail overall. Wellington's brow creased as he recalled Father Alio claiming the injuries were not severe, wondering aloud what was truly wrong with the boy. Before Aaron could fully explain, the Duke reflected on how his son had reacted unusually calmly when told to apologize to Lady Ilia, noting that such quiet acceptance was completely unlike his usual explosive behavior. Suspicion flickered in Wellington's eyes as he assumed it was nothing more than an act, convinced that by the next day the boy would return to his reckless ways and cause more trouble. Aaron gently disagreed, expressing her belief that the young master might slowly change for the better with time. The Duke responded only with a weary sigh, turning his back as he admitted that he had abandoned such hopes long ago. His retreating figure carried nothing but disappointment, leaving Aaron standing alone in silence. While far away, Yurin remained unaware that even his own father had already written him off, and that the expectations tied to this new life were buried painfully low. Wellington felt a trace of sympathy for Aaron, believing the young woman deserved a life of freedom as a knight rather than being chained to someone as unbearable as his son, since serving a person with Yurin's past temperament could only be exhausting. Aaron, however, sensed that something was different today, because the pampered noble who once exploded over the smallest inconveniences now appeared unusually calm, restrained, and oddly purposeful. Earlier, when she had stared at him in disbelief while questioning his strange words, Yurin had simply stated that he wanted to train and asked her to guide him to the practice grounds, a request so out of character that it left her momentarily speechless. Even after she questioned his seriousness, Yurin only responded with a quiet smile, explaining that everyone had to begin somewhere, and soon after, the two stepped out into the vast halls of the Rock's mansion. The endless corridors made Yurin realize just how enormous the estate truly was, and within minutes his breathing grew heavy, his legs shaking under his own weight, yet he stubbornly forced himself forward. He knew that staying in bed would only keep him trapped in this bloated body forever, and that thought alone pushed him onward. Although his eye of creation now allowed him to see the status of others, the four heavens of the Tang clan technique remained sealed, and he had no idea what conditions were needed to unlock it. Servants lining the corridors watched them pass with hushed voices and mocking looks, and while Yurin felt their disdain clearly, he did not protest, understanding that the former Yurin Rocks had earned every ounce of hatred through arrogance, cruelty, and selfishness. Even so, his hands tightened into fists as he silently swore that he would not remain that man. Upon reaching the courtyard, exhaustion creeping deeper into his bones, Yurin finally asked whether they were close, and Aaron confirmed they had reached the third training hall, a place rarely used since most knights favored the first two. Just as they approached the entrance, a sudden chill surged through Yurin's body, freezing him in place as his eye of creation activated on its own and displayed a crimson warning that screamed danger and death. Ahead of them stood a tall knight calmly practicing his sword, each swing smooth and effortless, and the moment his gaze landed on Yurin, a sharp smirk spread across his face. Recognition struck Yurin instantly, his heart lurching as he realized this was Recap Alian, one of the strongest knights of the family and the person who loathed him more than anyone else. The tension thickened as Rekka's mocking amusement became clear, and Yurin's forced composure began to crack while his eyes flicked toward the blade in the knight's hand. Though he tried to call out softly to Aaron, the icy intent radiating from Recca made one thing painfully obvious, that a single wrong move here would mean Yurin would never walk out of that training hall alive. Yurin quietly asked whether there was bad blood between himself and Recca, prompting Aaron to hurriedly explain that years ago, when the Marquis had tried to force the young master into training, Yurin had mocked Recca as nothing more than a lowly squire and, worse still, had laughed while leaving a scar on him, an incident that ultimately made the Marquis abandon all hope of turning his son into a proper knight. The memory made Yurin clench his jaw in shame as he admitted to himself how truly pathetic he had been back then. Recca glanced at him from the corner of his eye with undisguised scorn, convinced that the young master standing there was still the same useless fool as ever. Wanting to escape the suffocating tension, Yurin asked if there was another place where he could train by himself, and Aaron mentioned a fourth training ground that was old, distant, and mostly ignored due to its poor condition. Rather than being discouraged, Yurin felt relieved, thinking it was ideal since he wanted to lose weight and rebuild himself seriously without anyone observing his struggles. With a tired sigh, Aaron agreed and guided him there, though by the time they arrived, Yurin was gasping for air, sweat pouring down his face from the exhausting walk alone. The hall they entered was barren and neglected, filled with dust, broken racks, and worn-out targets that spoke of long abandonment. On a small table rested several daggers, and Yurin recalled that the Tang clan was famous for its throwing techniques, which stirred his curiosity enough to pick one up and test it. He lined it up clumsily, hurled it forward with all his strength, and watched as it struck the ground uselessly, sliding toward the target before stopping short. Annoyance washed over him as he realized just how weak and untrained his body truly was, and his hope that such an action might awaken the Tang clan's martial art faded instantly when nothing happened. Seeing Aaron watching, he hastily brushed off the failure, acting as though it had only been a casual test, then decided it was better to begin at the very basics by improving his endurance instead. Declaring that he would run laps around the hall, he told Eren she was free to rest or do whatever she wished while he trained on his own. Eren could only stare in disbelief as the young master actually began running, his heavy footsteps echoing through the empty space. While elsewhere in the mansion, even his father wondered how long this unfamiliar determination would last, because for the first time in his life, Eren Rox, the laziest noble of them all, was sweating by choice. 3 weeks slipped past, leaving the Lord stunned by what he saw, because the son who once avoided effort like a plague had not skipped a single day of training, and the change in him was impossible to miss. The excess fat had melted away from his body, his round cheeks sharpened into clean lines, and with his jaw and features restored, the young man now carried a striking, almost refined appearance that made the Lord quietly question whether his hopeless child had finally matured. Away from prying eyes, Eren stood in his room wiping sweat from his neck, deeply satisfied with how far he had come, even though one problem stubbornly remained, as the martial techniques of the Sichuan Tang clan still refused to awaken no matter how hard he pushed himself. Letting out a slow breath, he decided that if an entire month passed without progress, he would stop waiting and start stealing the so-called destined chances meant for the story's hero. At that moment, Eren arrived with a tray in hand and placed before him a bowl of chirin soup, a specially prepared dish known for strengthening the body while burning away excess fat. Eren accepted it with appreciation, though inside he couldn't help grumbling about how dull it was to eat the same thing day after day without change. When Eren noticed his displeasure and questioned it, Eren admitted his frustration at having eaten nothing else for weeks, only for Eren to bluntly remind him that he was training to become a knight, not indulging himself. She firmly pointed out that even the respected Marquis relied on chirin soup after intense training, leaving Eren with no choice but to stop complaining and accept it. With a resigned nod, he convinced himself that if this strange tradition truly helped his body, then enduring it was worth the trouble. He lifted the spoon and swallowed a mouthful, but the moment it touched his tongue, something felt wrong, as a sharp tingling spread and his stomach twisted uncomfortably. A faint ringing echoed in his mind as a glowing message appeared before his eyes, warning him of poison, and Eren froze in shock, staring at the bowl as the terrifying realization hit him that his so-called miracle meal might not be nourishment at all, but something far more dangerous. The instant the poison alert appeared, a second message followed, stopping Euren's racing thoughts cold as it announced that the conditions had been fulfilled and the Sichuan Tang clan technique had finally awakened. He could only stare in stunned silence, caught between excitement and disbelief, as it slowly sank in that the very poison he had nearly panicked over had become the key to unlocking the martial art he had struggled to access for weeks. Elsewhere in the mansion, Lord Wellington sat near a window, quietly reflecting on his son's unexpected dedication and praising his effort in his heart, when a gentle knock interrupted his thoughts. His second wife, Kaina, entered with graceful steps, carrying a tray of tea and lightly remarking on how deeply lost in thought he seemed. Wellington responded calmly, brushing it off by admiring the garden outside, which prompted Kaina to smile and mention that she had been personally caring for it, devoting herself to every corner. He acknowledged her effort warmly, but before the moment could settle, she moved closer and raised the long-standing question of when their son Colin would finally be declared the heir, noting that the matter had been delayed for too long. Wellington shifted uncomfortably and explained that he needed more time, which only deepened her frown as she recalled his promise to make the announcement earlier. With a heavy breath, he admitted that circumstances had changed, explaining that Eren had begun behaving differently, showing discipline and responsibility he had never displayed before, and as the eldest son of House Rox, there was still a chance he could rightfully inherit if he continued on this path. Kaina listened quietly, her stern expression easing though a trace of disappointment remained, as she accepted his reasoning and acknowledged that such a change might ultimately benefit everyone. Wellington gave a silent nod in response, feeling a sense of relief wash over him. Wellington let out a dry laugh, finding it oddly fitting that a beating from his own fiancée had been what finally knocked some sense into his son, though Kaina clearly did not share his humor and quickly pressed him about the matter of choosing the family's next heir. The Lord answered evenly that 3 weeks of effort meant nothing yet, explaining that it was far too early to reach any conclusion and that he intended to watch Eren a while longer before deciding, while also making it clear that if his eldest son slipped back into laziness and disgrace, Colin would be named successor without hesitation. Kaina accepted his words with a rigid nod and excused herself, mentioning she would return to her room and urging him to finish his work before long. The moment she stepped out of the Duke's office, the gentle mask she wore shattered, her lips tightening as restrained anger burned in her eyes, and she silently vowed that Yurin would soon regret standing in her way. Back in his own room, Yurin was barely able to keep his excitement in check, as the long-sought Sichuan Tang clan ability had finally awakened, and he quickly pieced together the reason, realizing that the clan's martial art was triggered through exposure to poison. Driven by curiosity, he opened the system window and examined the soup more closely, noticing a small symbol beside its name that expanded into a list revealing Henyang herb, a substance known for its mild paralyzing effects. The discovery left him both stunned and impressed, while across the room Aaron stared at him in confusion, wondering why he had suddenly stopped eating. Pulling himself together, Yurin forced a casual smile and continued his meal, though his thoughts raced uncontrollably. Someone had intentionally tampered with his food, and the fact that the original owner of this body possessed natural resistance to toxins meant the culprit never expected the poison to be detected, a realization that sent an icy chill creeping through his spine as the true danger of his situation became painfully clear. There was an unsettling feeling in the air, as if the chain of events he remembered had quietly shifted onto a new path, and the more Yurin thought about it, the more he realized that his father still had not officially chosen Colin as the heir, which was not how things were supposed to go. His sudden commitment to training must have interfered with that decision, but the appearance of poison in his meal was far too well-timed to be random, making it likely that it came from that very side of the household. After swallowing the final bite, he wiped his lips just as another system notice appeared, confirming that the requirements for the weak paralysis poison had been satisfied. The confirmation left him quietly assured that the effect had taken hold, even as Aaron reacted with concern and asked about his condition, prompting Yurin to calmly request some privacy. She paused briefly before agreeing, reminding him to rest as she exited and gently closed the door behind her. Alone at last, Yurin stood before the mirror, resolve burning in his gaze as he prepared to finally test the true power of the Sichuan Tang clan techniques. Summoning the creator's eye, he called forth his status panel, which materialized in front of him and revealed that his synchronization rate had dipped slightly to 97%, suggesting that the system was becoming more refined. His attention shifted to a glowing plus symbol, and when he focused on it, a new list expanded, revealing entire branches dedicated to poison arts, martial disciplines, and concealed weapon techniques. A surge of excitement coursed through him as he explored the poison section first, only to find that for now, only the weak paralysis ability was available while all others remained sealed, with no internal energy method unlocked yet. Scrolling further, he saw an entire hierarchy of toxins, beginning with harmless irritants and ending with the ominous invisibility poison at the very bottom, making it clear that this power system required steady progression, forcing him to start from the lowest rung and climb upward step by step. To activate his first usable skill, weak paralysis, Yurin quickly understood that he lacked one crucial thing, an internal energy method, which fit perfectly since the Sichuan Tang clan was known for blending poison directly into their inner power. When he opened the martial technique section, 3 choices revealed themselves at once. One centered purely on toxins, another focused on concealed weapons, and a final method that combined both paths but demanded far greater control and talent. The decision felt effortless, especially to someone who had grown up obsessed with wuxia stories, and he immediately selected the most complex and versatile option. The instant his choice was confirmed, a burning sensation surged through his body as knowledge poured into his mind, as though the system itself, engraved in ancient cultivation, chanced straight into his consciousness. The overwhelming sensation left him stunned yet thrilled, eager to experience its effects firsthand. Removing his shirt, he settled onto the bed in a cross-legged position and began drawing energy inward, concentrating it toward his lower abdomen. Gradually, he sensed an unfamiliar force gathering, a flowing presence that could only be the chi described in countless martial legends. With careful focus, he guided that energy along unseen pathways throughout his body, letting it circulate before pulling it back and condensing it deep inside once more. Time lost all meaning as the process continued, hours passing unnoticed until the first light of morning slipped through the window. When Yurin finally opened his eyes and rose to his feet, he felt astonishingly renewed, his body light and brimming with vitality rather than fatigue. The stories had been true after all, as training through the night had not drained him but sharpened every sense, making the air feel crisp, the world vivid, and even distant movements outside the window clear enough for him to notice the flutter of wings and count passing birds without even looking. A steady warmth now flowed through Yurin's lower abdomen, pulsing like a quiet flame that refused to go out, and the moment he concentrated, the system interface appeared on its own, revealing that his newly learned technique had already reached its first star. Before he could dwell on it, he sensed a familiar presence outside the door, and soon after, Erin entered to wake him, only to pause when she noticed how alert and energized he looked. Realizing he had not rested at all, she questioned him with concern, but Erin simply admitted he had stayed awake through the night without feeling the slightest fatigue. Though Erin urged him to rest before pushing his body again, Erin refused, insisting he felt better than ever and was ready to continue training immediately. Left with little choice, Erin agreed to prepare breakfast and stepped out, silently wondering when the once sluggish young master had begun carrying himself with such strength and confidence. Later that day at the training grounds, Erin stood before a table lined with daggers and picked one up, curiosity and anticipation mixing in his chest as he prepared to test his progress. The instant he focused on the target, a glowing aiming mark appeared before his eyes, eerily similar to a game interface. With a sharp flick of his arm, the dagger shot forward and pierced the center of the target perfectly, releasing a faint purple glow upon impact. Shock and excitement surged through Erin as he realized the throw had been flawless, while Erin watched from nearby in utter disbelief at what she had just witnessed. Still riding the thrill, Erin brushed it off casually, pretending it was nothing more than the result of hard work finally bearing fruit, even as he knew deep down that something far more extraordinary had begun. Erin stood frozen in shock, her eyes wide as she struggled to accept what she had just witnessed, because something like that simply should not have been possible. Erin couldn't suppress a pleased grin, amused that this was likely the first time he had ever seen her so completely speechless. Wanting to be sure it wasn't a fluke, he reached for another dagger and steadied his breathing as he gathered his focus once more. As he prepared to throw, a surge of force rose from his dantian and rushed through his arm like a sudden strike of lightning, filling him with confidence. With a crisp, decisive movement, he hurled the blade with everything he had, and it tore through the air like a cannon shot, smashing straight into the target and breaking it apart in an explosion of splinters. Erin could only gasp, unable to form words, while Erin watched the destruction with open satisfaction. He casually joked about his accuracy. The memory of winning an online tournament surfaced briefly, making the moment feel strangely familiar. When Erin asked what he was talking about, Erin laughed it off and instead asked if she noticed anything unusual about him. After studying him carefully, Erin hesitantly admitted that he seemed even slimmer than before, though nothing else stood out to her. Her inability to sense anything beyond his appearance made something click in Erin's mind, and he realized that internal energy was completely undetectable to others in this world. That meant he alone possessed a hidden power no one else could perceive, and as that truth settled in, a calm, confident smile slowly spread across his face. For the first time since arriving here, he felt certain that the game had truly begun. Erin chuckled quietly, feeling confident since every dagger he threw was hitting the bullseye without fail. After two flawless throws back-to-back, a wide grin spread across his face as he decided to make things more interesting. He aimed carefully and tossed another dagger so skillfully that it stuck right into the handle of the one already lodged in the target. Proud of his trick shot, he admired it with satisfaction. Erin stood nearby, eyes wide in amazement, completely taken aback once more. After a brief pause, she frowned and asked if she could give a try. Erin shrugged and handed her a dagger without hesitation. Taking a deep breath, Erin focused hard and threw with everything she had, but the dagger fell to the ground with a dull clatter, missing the target completely. Frustration crossed her face as she quietly admitted this kind of skill just wasn't her forte. Just as Erin was about to offer some encouragement, something surprising happened. A small status window suddenly appeared above Erin's head. His eyes grew wide with shock. He noticed she had unlocked a new ability called Direct Cut, which could be used with any weapon. Excited, Erin decided to test if he could use the skill too. Erin folded her arms, annoyed that her skill hadn't activated yet, but stepped aside as Erin grabbed a broken wooden sword from the rack. She shot him a doubtful look, silently asking what he planned to do with such a useless weapon. Erin just smiled and raised the sword high, feeling a surge of power flow from his dantian through his arms. With one strong swing, the air cracked sharply, and the broken sword flew like a missile, hitting the target right in the middle and smashing it to bits. The sound of the powerful strike echoed across the training hall, leaving Erin speechless while Erin beamed with pride. Erin watched with wide eyes, amazed as she asked what kind of move that was. Erin, still catching his breath, scratched his head and said he wasn't sure. Maybe all the practice was finally paying off. Erin frowned, shaking her head firmly, convinced that training alone couldn't cause something like that. Erin gave a small smile and lowered his voice, asking her to keep what happened between them for now. He explained he was still experimenting and promised to explain everything later, asking her to be patient. Though puzzled, Aaron agreed quietly. The day passed without incident as the staff finished their work and prepared to leave. One of them was a quiet man named Peru, who gave a polite nod before walking away. Watching him leave, Urin's happy expression faded, replaced by cold suspicion. Narrowing his eyes, he activated the creator's eye, revealing details about Peru. Name, no special affinity, but skills like poison touch and agile movement. A chill ran through Urin's body. He muttered that he had found the one who had been slipping poison into his food. A faint smile crossed his lips as he decided to test his powers. Whispering the name of a paralysis spell, a dark green glow gathered on his fingertips. An arrow-shaped light hovered before him, pulsing with toxic energy. As he aimed it at Peru, the man suddenly froze mid-step, trembling as if realizing too late that something dangerous was coming his way. Peru spun around, panic flashing in his eyes as he tried to speak, but found his body frozen. His voice cut off suddenly, and then he collapsed, unable to move. Urin calmly stepped forward, crouching beside him with a satisfied grin. He noted the poison's effect lasted about an hour, then lifted the unconscious man onto his back and carried him to a quiet place. Night had fallen, the air heavy and cold, and as the paralysis began to fade, Peru's body twitched. Urin tapped his cheek lightly, urging him awake, and asked if he remembered who he was. Terror filled Peru's eyes as they snapped open. Urin's tone sharpened, demanding a clear answer if he wanted to survive. He instructed Peru to blink once for yes and twice for no. Peru blinked once. Leaning closer, Urin asked again if he had poisoned his food. Peru's gaze grew cold, but he blinked once more. Urin guessed right and pressed further, asking if the poison had been the Hanyang herb. Peru shuddered, blinking once again to confirm. Urin's eyes darkened with suspicion as he asked if Martianus Kana had given the order. This time, Peru blinked twice. Urin's expression hardened, warning him not to lie. He said he could sense dishonesty and that lying again would cost him his life. Closing in, Urin's presence felt heavy and threatening as he demanded once more if Kana had sent him. Peru's face drained of color as he shook his head wildly, denying the claim again. Urin looked him over carefully and sensed the man was telling the truth, but decided to play along for now. Calmly, he reached into his pocket and pulled out a small black pill. He told Peru to take it, called paralytic poison. Though hesitant, one sharp glare from Urin made him swallow it. Urin's voice stayed steady, but carried a warning. Peru had exactly 1 month to live unless he got the antidote from Urin. Otherwise, his insides would slowly dissolve. If he wanted to survive, he had to obey completely. Peru nodded desperately. Urin placed his hand on Peru's head and ended the paralysis, making the man gasp as feeling returned. Peru wobbled to his feet, still shaking. Urin then asked one final time who had sent him to poison him. Fear flashed across Peru's face before he stammered that it was Knight Captain Kerox Livington, who ordered Urin's death before the year ended. Urin narrowed his eyes, thinking of Kana's brother, someone given a position by influence but lacking skill. That detail didn't matter now. Urin pulled out a folded paper and handed it to Peru. It was filled with strange symbols. Peru nervously asked if those were all poisons. Urin smiled, impressed. He noted not many in the household could understand the writing, so it seemed he had found the perfect man for the job. Urin ordered Peru to buy more poisons from the black market and use Carrick's money to pay for them, demanding every toxin he could find, including the one Peru already had, to be ready by the next night. When Peru asked why he needed so many poisons, Urin sharply told him not to ask questions, and Peru obediently nodded like a defeated dog. Urin then warned that all the medicinal soup from now on would be laced with the Hanyang herb, which made Peru's eyes go wide in shock. Back in his room, Urin laughed quietly at how amazing martial arts really were, since even he had been fooled by the weak paralysis poison made from just a few mixed leaves, and Peru had swallowed it without hesitation. But there was no time to relax. Urin needed to quickly master the 4 heavens of the Tang clan skill, because if things followed the story's path, disaster would come soon. The next day, Peru arrived carrying a bundle of herbs and laid them out. Hanyang herbs, a vine called reverse green creeper, and a dark leaf known as crow ink. Peru was surprised that Urin recognized all of them, but Urin shrugged it off, saying the knowledge came from his status window. Then he asked why Peru brought more than just the Hanyang herb. Peru explained that Hanyang worked slowly, and victims could develop resistance, but when mixed with the green creeper, the poison's power grew stronger and became harder to detect. Urin smiled coldly and summarized it simply. Poisons combined hit harder and are easier to hide. Urin was curious how Peru knew so much about poisons, so he asked. Peru explained that when he was just 8, he was sold to the Livington family, where a poison expert trained 20 kids, but only Peru survived. Yurin thought that without some natural resistance, no child could have lasted. And since Peru didn't seem grateful to his old masters, Yurin figured he might have gained a loyal and useful helper. He praised Peru's skill and sent him away for the night. Alone, Yurin stared at the poisonous herbs on the table and decided it was time to move forward. He picked one up, bit into it with determination, and fought through the bitter taste that almost made him gag. Immediately, a system alert warned him that had consumed multiple poisons and was in critical condition, telling him to meditate to reach the next level. Pushing himself, Yurin took slow, deep breaths and focused on moving his internal energy. Hours passed, and the next morning, Erin knocked on his door. When she saw him sitting calmly cross-legged, glowing with a strange energy, she gasped at how much he had changed overnight. When Yurin finally opened his eyes, he realized he had reached 2 stars in cultivation and unlocked the draconic treasure martial art along with mastery of 3 new deadly poisons. Yurin woke up feeling lighter and happier than usual, but before he could say anything, Erin noticed a terrible smell and asked what it was. He awkwardly scratched his head and explained it was probably bad stuff leaving his body after his energy improved. He grumbled that even he couldn't stand the smell and tried to open a window, but Erin stopped him, telling him to take a bath right away instead. Later, she saw him outside practicing awkward footwork, swaying side to side like someone drunk. Actually, Yurin was copying the draconic steps, a famous dodging move from the Tang clan had only heard about in stories. Erin asked if he felt okay, but Yurin just laughed, stumbling through the steps. She warned him he was heading toward Training Hall 1, where many skilled knights practiced. Yurin smiled with confidence and said that was exactly why he was going there, to watch how real knights trained, and that she didn't need to worry about him at all. Erin warned that they were nearly at the training area, with a sharp clang of swords filled the air. The knights were deep in their practice, swinging their blades with strength, their skin shining with sweat in the bright sun. One knight stopped suddenly, confused when he saw Erin. He whispered to a companion, asking if she wasn't the eldest son's servant. Then he looked at the man behind her, surprised at how fit and sharp he looked now. Whispers spread fast. No one could believe the once chubby, lazy heir had transformed into someone so strong. They guessed it was some magic or special diet, but Yurin caught every word with his keen senses and smiled quietly, pretending not to hear. Erin then pointed to a focused young man nearby, training hard. She said his name was Cried, a knight trainee, soon to be promoted, and told Yurin to watch carefully because this was the core of the Rock's family sword style. Yurin's interest piqued. He recognized Cried's name from the story he had written. In that tale, Cried would become the hero's closest friend. But here, he was just a hard-working student practicing the same sword move again and again. Yurin chuckled, finding it amusing to see a future hero sweating away in the background of his own changed story. Yurin saw this as the perfect moment to test his new skills. Since the knights here barely liked him, they were ideal targets. His gaze settled on a proud knight with purple hair who looked like he thought very highly of himself. Yurin quietly chose him and activated one of his new poison techniques, prolonged poison. Moments later, the knight suddenly grabbed his stomach, dropped to his knees, and groaned in pain. His teammates hurried over, confused, asking if he needed to go to the restroom. The knight insisted he didn't, saliva dripping as he struggled, but then he collapsed completely. Panic spread, someone called for a priest, and just as quickly, the knight stopped shaking and looked perfectly fine, leaving everyone baffled. His captain snapped at him to stop pretending and go use the bathroom. The knight protested he wasn't faking, but Yurin just smiled quietly. His first test was a success. Next, he activated soul-killing smoke. Almost immediately, another knight froze, terrified by visions only he could see, dark monsters and skeletons emerging from the shadows, reaching out for him. He screamed and swung his sword wildly, while others around him seemed to share the same terrifying hallucinations. Then, the knight blinked and shuddered as the nightmare disappeared. He gasped, confused about what had just happened. Yurin smirked, feeling satisfied. That was enough testing for now. He told Erin to end the session and said they'd continue later at the 4th training hall. Erin was stunned as he calmly left, having turned the night's practice into total chaos. As Yurin and Erin headed toward the next training hall, they were stopped by a maid who told them a visitor had come for Yurin, Miss Ilya Marcus. Elsewhere in the mansion, a young woman stood by a window, her eyes filled with determination as she whispered that this time she would finally break Yurin's stubborn pride. When Yurin entered the room and quietly called her name, she turned around, surprised and blushing slightly. She hesitated, not recognizing him at first, and asked who he was. The maid had already announced Ilya's arrival, and Yurin knew exactly who she was, his fierce and strong-willed fiancée. In the original story, this was the day she tried to end their engagement, but the old Yurin had stubbornly clung to her out of obsession. Now, things were very different. With a small smile, he introduced himself as Yurin, mentioning it had been a while since they last met. Ilya blinked, amazed at how much he had changed and how much weight he had lost in just 2 months. She was surprised by his calm attitude and wondered if he planned to get revenge for the past. Yurin shook his head gently, his expression softening as he thanked her for being the push he needed to change. He lowered himself to one knee, sincerely offering to accept her decision if she wanted to end their engagement, but mainly just wanting to apologize properly. Ilya was speechless, quietly wondering who this new Yurin was and what had happened to the old one. Yurin gave a sheepish smile and called himself the useless son of the Rock's family, bowing deeply to apologize once more for all the trouble had caused. Ilya was caught off guard by how genuine he seemed. Deep down, Yurin knew the mess wasn't really his fault. It was the old owner of this body who had ruined everything. Still, he felt responsible for fixing it. Ilya wasn't just any noblewoman. She was destined to be the Sword Queen, a master swordswoman who could change the fate of the story. In the original tale, she was the one who pulled the hero from despair and even defeated the final villain. That meant, even if their engagement was doomed, Yurin needed her as an ally. Ilya folded her arms and frowned, demanding that he stand up and ask if he truly meant what he said. Yurin nodded without hesitation, promising every word was true. She then challenged him to swear it, her presence turning cold and heavy, making the room feel suffocating, like a sharp blade pressing at his throat. Yurin's heart raced as he thought, this moment feels familiar. Ilya warned him that if he went back to his old foolish ways, he would regret it. Surprised by her fierce tone, Yurin quickly mumbled something about a mysterious myriad poison of the electric divine art, hoping to lighten the mood. Ilya blinked, confused by the odd phrase, while Yurin straightened up and finally relaxed enough to breathe again. Ilya blushed deeply and quickly left, warning Yurin that she'd be watching him carefully and that if he messed up again, she'd end their engagement. No excuses allowed. Yurin gave an awkward smile and promised he wouldn't fail her, which only made Ilya's cheeks burn even more as she walked away. Later, in the Duke's study, Wellington asked if Ilya had found Yurin and what her decision was. She replied firmly that she wasn't breaking the engagement just yet. Her father always said people don't change, but rumors said Yurin had, so she wanted to see for herself if the spoiled boy she once knew was really gone or if the kind child she remembered had returned. She decided to give him another chance. Wellington raised an eyebrow, but chuckled, telling her that if Yurin slipped up, she should beat some sense into him and take good care of him. Ilya agreed, though she felt awkward admitting she had already told her father she planned to break the engagement. When Wellington asked if she planned to visit Yurin before leaving, she shook her head, saying he was busy training and she didn't want to disturb him. As the day passed, Yurin kept wondering why his father had suddenly called him to the study. When he arrived, Wellington greeted him with a teasing grin, joking about whether Yurin even knew who he was talking to. Yurin looked puzzled, not understanding the joke, but his father laughed it off and praised him for working hard lately. Then, his tone became serious as he asked if Yurin knew why they were meeting. Yurin guessed it was about starting his night training, and Wellington nodded proudly, saying he was right and even sharper than before. He then announced it was time for Yurin to learn the Rock's family's old sword techniques. But Yurin hesitated and respectfully said he wanted to focus on throwing weapons instead. Wellington frowned, clearly unhappy, and snapped that such skills were crude and better suited for thieves, not noble knights. He added that with those tricks, Yurin wouldn't even scratch a low-level monster like a Borik, much less defeat one. Yurin smiled quietly and proposed a bet. If he could beat a Borik using throwing daggers, his father would have to accept his choice. Wellington sighed in disbelief, calling his son stubborn beyond reason. He said Borik's scales could only be broken by aura, and no amount of training could pierce them. But Yurin's eyes shone with confidence as he replied that his father wouldn't mind betting on it. Wellington laughed darkly, shaking his head. He agreed, saying he'd personally put an end to Yurin's foolish pride and see how far his recklessness would get him. When his father asked about the conditions of the bet, Yurin confidently stated that if he managed to kill a Borik using only his dagger, he would be free to train however he wished. But if he failed, he promised to follow any order his father gave without hesitation. That night, as he prepared for the challenge, Yurin felt relieved that Eren hadn't told anyone about his secret practice. Tomorrow was the real test, and he wondered how many attempts it would take to break through the Borik's thick armor. To boost his chances, he decided to take more poisonous herbs to strengthen his myriad poison divine body and push it to a higher level. Suddenly, he heard footsteps and saw Aaron entering with a message from the Marquis. The duel was scheduled for noon tomorrow in the first training hall. Aaron sighed, surprised that even she knew about the bet. Aaron nervously laughed, explaining that the news had already spread through the entire estate. Everyone was eagerly waiting to watch him fail, with many joking that he would faint or run away as soon as he faced the Boric. Aaron smirked quietly, thinking that while they mocked him now, he would make sure this day was remembered for a completely different reason. Aaron muttered that with all the rumors flying around, half the estate would probably come just to watch. Aaron agreed, mentioning that even the Marquis had made sure the training hall would be filled for the event. Aaron sighed, calling it the cost of being well-known, then asked what she really thought would happen. Aaron smiled confidently, saying she believed today was the moment he'd prove everyone wrong. That night, Aaron pushed his myriad poison divine body to its third level, feeling a powerful energy rushing through him. The next day, the long-anticipated duel finally arrived. The stands were packed, the crowd's voices mixing between jeers and cheers, some mocking, others rooting for the young master. Aaron groaned, calling the whole thing embarrassing. Then Wellington stepped forward, asking if Aaron was ready. Aaron nodded, but complained quietly about the huge audience. His father chuckled, explaining he had only told the family's court wizard, but somehow the news had spread everywhere. The wizard stepped up and announced he would start with a basic summoning spell. Aaron's heart pounded as he prepared to witness magic in action for the first time. Suddenly, a bright lightning bolt struck the ground, and when the smoke cleared, a massive, terrifying creature appeared. Aaron froze, stunned. It was the very beast he had created in his own story, now standing in front of him in real life. From the swirling smoke, a Boric appeared, a sea creature nearly 1.5 meters tall, its shiny scales sparkling in the sunlight and sharp fins twitching threateningly. The crowd gasped and stepped back, some too scared to even look at it. But Aaron couldn't help but grin, impressed. The monster looked just like he had imagined it when he first created the idea, back when he was an author lost in thought over a plate of purple fish sashimi. If it didn't have those sharp claws and teeth, it might have seemed almost cute. The beast let out a low roar and charged at him. Aaron moved smoothly to the side, disappearing behind it in a flash, leaving the spectators wide-eyed. Wellington folded his arms and murmured that the battle wasn't finished yet. The Boric spun around, confused and angry, relying on raw strength instead of cleverness. Testing its defense, Aaron pulled out his dagger and froze for a moment when he spotted a faint, glowing mark blinking on the monster's scales, a weak spot only visible to him. Without wasting time, he filled his dagger with energy and threw it. The blade shot through the air like a bolt of lightning, striking the mark perfectly. The Boric screamed in pain, stiffened, and then crashed down heavily. The arena was quiet for a moment, then exploded with cheers. Aaron blinked, a bit let down. Just one hit, that's all, he murmured, scratching his head. Meanwhile, the crowd roared his name, and even Wellington stood stunned, shocked by his son's unbelievable win. The crowd roared with excitement as Aaron stood tall, his dagger still stuck in the fallen Boric's body. Everyone was amazed. The young master had defeated a beast that even experienced knights struggled to beat. But the cheers stopped abruptly when a loud voice rang out. Wellington stormed forward, disbelief clear on his face, demanding what trick Aaron had used this time. Aaron just smiled and said he simply aimed carefully. The Marquis scowled deeply, refusing to believe it. He said no one could kill a Boric with a simple knife because its armor was tougher than steel. Aaron raised an eyebrow and teased that surely the Marquis wouldn't back out of a bet after losing. The crowd chuckled nervously, and the family wizard stepped forward with a bow, explaining there was a tiny unprotected spot under the Boric's arm where Aaron had struck. Wellington groaned and said it was all just luck. Aaron smirked and said maybe so, but luck still counted in a bet. The Marquis clenched his jaw and challenged Aaron to one more fight. If Aaron won, he could ask for any reasonable favor, but if he lost, he'd give up throwing knives and return to traditional sword training. Aaron's eyes lit up and his grin grew wide. He accepted immediately and asked who was next. Wellington stepped aside to reveal a tall, armored knight. This time, the challenger wouldn't be a monster, but one of his own men. Aaron welcomed the chance, knowing this was the perfect moment to face Karox, the knight commander, hoping to humble him, though he planned to hold back on using Peru's poison for now. Wellington warned that a fully skilled knight would be too difficult to beat, so he decided to send an apprentice instead, thinking it was a fair match. Aaron thought it over and chose Kraid, the fencing trainee, as his challenger. Kraid entered the arena confidently, his sword resting on his back. Wellington noticed Kraid a bold attitude and gave him a simple command to teach the young master a lesson. Kraid nodded seriously, ready to obey. But when Yurin casually waved at him, Kraid suddenly hesitated, unsure what to make of the gesture. Wellington chuckled and asked if Kraid wasn't confident. Kraid insisted he would give it his all. Yurin smiled and told him not to worry. It was just 3 dagger throws, and if Kraid blocked every one, he'd be the winner. Wellington smirked, noticing the apprentice's pride, and encouraged him to put the young master in his place. Sword in hand, Kraid readied himself, while Yurin began moving around the arena, preparing for the battle to begin. Kraid, a fellow knights, joked that if he lost, he'd have to skip dinner and run 100 laps around a training field. From the crowd, a soft, encouraging voice cheered for Yurin, making him smile. It was nice to know someone was rooting for him. Kraid called out that he was ready, and Yurin turned to prepare his first dagger, aiming to start strong by trying to blind his opponent. Compared to fighting the Borak, Kraid left many openings, so if Yurin hit one, the match could end quickly. Determined not to give Kraid a chance, Yurin threw the dagger straight at him. Kraid raised a sword to block, but was knocked back several steps by the impact. The crowd gasped as a loud bang echoed like a cannon shot. Wellington told Yurin to hold on and noticed the dagger had fallen to the ground. He picked it up, surprised that such force came from a simple dagger. Kraid's hands trembled. His sword had been pierced. Yurin smiled confidently and asked if Kraid was warmed up yet, reminding him of what happens when he drops his guard. Then Yurin warned to stay alert because this time he'd give it his all, making Kraid shake under the pressure. Still, Yurin knew Kraid wasn't just any fighter. He was a main character in this story and wouldn't be easy to defeat. With that in mind, Yurin readied his dagger again, launching a fierce attack toward the knight. Kraid swung his long sword to fight back, but a loud, powerful clash shook the whole arena. When the dust settled, everyone gasped. Kraid was kneeling, trembling with fear, his sword broken clean in half. He dropped the shattered pieces, leaving Marquis Wellington speechless. The Marquis called Yurin over, wanting to talk privately. Yurin reminded him the match wasn't finished. He still had 1 dagger left. The Marquis looked surprised, but said it seemed like the outcome was clear. Instead of ending the fight, then, Yurin stepped toward Kraid and urged him to look up. He questioned if Kraid really wanted to quit like this. He challenged him, saying a true knight never gives up, no matter if they win or lose. Yurin pressed one last time, asking if Kraid was ready to surrender now. After a pause, Kraid finally said no, asking Yurin to bring him a new sword. Standing up with strong determination and a fiery energy around him, he declared he wasn't going to give up just yet. The knights watched in awe, while Marquis Wellington wondered how someone like Kraid, still a beginner, could release such a fierce aura. Yurin recognized this as Kraid Berserker mode, an intense power only fighters reached in critical moments. It was the perfect time to use his stronger skills. The two faced each other with tense eyes. Kraid called out for Yurin to throw his dagger. Wellington thought silently that this was impossible. Only the best knights could show such energy. Yurin grinned, ready for the challenge. He grabbed his last dagger and threw it in a clumsy, slow arc straight toward Kraid. Kraid laughed, thinking Yurin was joking because the dagger moved so slowly. He raised his sword to cut it, but the dagger curved around the blade like it was guided by magic. Confused, Kraid's expression changed, and Wellington's eyes grew wide as he saw the dagger pierce Kraid's side, almost hitting bone and causing a sharp sting. The crowd whispered, puzzled by how slow the dagger seemed, and wondering if Kraid was holding back because it was Yurin. Yurin thought the dagger must be powered up with internal energy, making the slow strike still hit hard. Wellington called out to Yurin, saying they'd talk later since Head already lost the bet. Yurin just smiled quietly. Kraid grimaced from the pain in his shoulder, but Yurin quickly used his energy absorption skill to lessen the ache. The pain eased, and Kraid gave a genuine thanks, though Yurin just brushed it off casually. The knight admitted he had thought Yurin was joking at first with the slow dagger throw, but it turned out to be a sharp and skilled move, something even experienced fighters struggled to master so fast. Kraid speculated about a hidden group targeting the Marquis family, which might explain why Yurin kept his true power a secret. He admired Yurin's choice to stay quiet and let others take the lead. Yurin rolled his eyes at Kraid a wild guess, but respected the knight's loyalty. Kraid promised that if Yurin ever faced this secret enemy, he would back him up without question. Surprised at how much Kraid liked him now, Yurin agreed to work together, seeing Kraid as a straightforward and trustworthy ally. Kraid said Head, make sure everyone knew Yurin wasn't weak anymore. Yurin realized sticking close to Kraid could be smart. Soon, he'd be handling missions alone, and having a dependable friend would be helpful. Erin praised the young master for his performance, and Yurin thanked her warmly. She mentioned his final move, saying she had never seen anything like it before. Yurin proudly explained it was a new technique he had invented and asked for her opinion. Eren admitted that if she had faced him without knowing about the move, she probably would have lost, but now that she understood it, she felt confident she could defend against it. Yurin noticed she wasn't joking. Among her rare talents was the Tranquil Mind Mirror, a skill very few people possessed. He reminded her that she had trained as a knight since she was a child, and said if she hadn't let her guard down once, she might have already earned her knighthood. Then, unexpectedly, he asked if she was happy with how her life had turned out, which took her by surprise. Later that day, Wellington was resting in his study when Yurin arrived, answering the summons. The Marquis waved him inside, telling Yurin to drop formal titles and just call him father, joking that stiff manners spoiled the mood. Yurin agreed, still a bit puzzled by the change. Wellington then asked about the technique Yurin used the day before, saying that despite searching through countless old records, he couldn't find anything like it. He pointed out that Yurin had only been training for a month, and that even the most talented prodigy couldn't create a brand new skill from scratch. Wellington demanded to know the full truth and ordered Yurin to be honest. Yurin understood he couldn't reveal everything, but thankfully, he had a plan ready. Calmly, he said he had come across a mysterious book. His father immediately asked what kind of book it was. Yurin explained that while searching the state library for training manuals, he accidentally found a book lying on the floor. Curious about who might have dropped it, he rested against a wall to think. Suddenly, an old, dusty book fell from the top shelf. It had no title, just a strange symbol engraved on the cover. Without hesitation, Yurin opened it. A sudden flash filled his mind with unfamiliar knowledge, and just as quickly, the book vanished. Wellington said that meant it was a magic tome. Yurin agreed, explaining that magic tomes were like personal guidebooks created by powerful mages to pass on their skills. His father added that these tomes worked exactly like that, and might have come from their ancestors. This made the find an incredible stroke of luck. Yurin decided to see it as a lucky gift dropped right into his lap. Standing up, his father reminded him that a promise was a promise, and said he would no longer force him to train in swordsmanship. As a reward for keeping his word, he told Yurin to ask for anything he wanted. Yurin calmly responded to his father. Yurin asked for the position of heir, which left Wellington momentarily speechless. His father warned him that choosing that path meant he wouldn't be able to protect him completely. After some thought, Wellington admitted that with his power, he could make Yurin the successor, but Yurin noticed the hesitation. He realized becoming the heir would bring a lot of trouble. Many people would resist the decision, especially a certain young lady who would likely cause chaos. So, Yurin decided to step back from that choice. His father asked briefly about his decision, but accepted it and thanked him. Yurin thought he never really cared about being the heir anyway, since that role would trap him in the mansion, forced to study endless lessons about managing land, while he preferred focusing on mastering the Tang clan's four heavens and exploring the world for new chances. Then Wellington told Yurin to name another wish. Yurin requested to create his own knight order, picking Eren, his current butler, and Kraid, his recent opponent, as his first knights. His father agreed easily, saying it was much simpler than making him the heir, and noted that Eren was too skilled to stay just a butler. He approved the plan, and Yurin thanked him. The Lord then asked what Yurin planned to do about Eren, since the mansion had very few butlers left. Yurin told his father about a man named Peru who worked in the kitchen and said he wanted to make Peru his new butler. He asked Wellington to take responsibility for it so Peru could have the chance. Wellington asked if there was a problem, but Yurin said had explained later. His father just sighed and agreed, showing how much trust he had in Yurin simply because he was family. Outside, Yurin declared that from now on, both Eren and Kraid were officially part of his personal knight order, and their main focus would be training to get stronger. Then he introduced Peru as their new butler, who nervously asked them to take care of him. Eren stayed silent, thinking about the question Shed wanted to ask the day before, why Yurin had suddenly replaced her with Peru. Yurin scratched his neck and told her the truth. Peru had been a spy sent by Commander Karox of the White Eagle and Lady Kana. Even though Eren said it made her uneasy to trust Peru as a butler, Yurin insisted that now Peru took orders only from him. At that moment, Kraid stepped forward with a question for the young master. Eren gave Kraid the go-ahead to speak, so he explained that even with just 2 members, their knight order needed a leader. Usually, the strongest person took charge, but since Eren looked small and gentle, he thought he should be the commander. Yurin agreed that the strongest should lead and told them to settle it with a fight. Moments later, Kraid admitted defeat with Eren's sword pressed lightly against his neck. Calmly, Eren pointed out that Kraid's moves were too easy to predict and that he needed to get better if he didn't want to make a fool of himself. Kraid accepted her advice and promised to improve. Yurin then named Eren the leader of the Knight Order, while he and Peru applauded her. Peru quickly excused himself to prepare dinner, ending the day. Later, feeling confident in his training, Yurin decided to test a new skill, using his inner energy to send sound waves directly into someone's mind, like a trick from a martial arts story. He silently called for Peru, who responded right away, turning around in surprise when he realized Yurin wasn't nearby. Yurin used the mind communication skill to call Peru's name several times, leaving the poor butler scared and confused. When Aaron noticed Peru's shaken expression and asked what was wrong, Peru complained that he felt like he was losing his mind and demanded to know if this was some kind of dark magic. Yurin calmly explained it was just a way to communicate silently, but Peru insisted it showed Yurin wasn't just poisoned before. He must be like those mysterious mages who use strange powers. Yurin just told him to believe what he wanted, then asked if the poison he requested was ready. Peru nervously confirmed it was prepared, a deadly toxin called snake's mind, made from venom of 100 snakes, and Yurin ordered him to add plenty of it to the celebration soup. Though trembling, Peru agreed and said he understood. The next morning, after finishing meditation, Yurin opened his eyes with a deep sigh, frustrated that he was still stuck at 3 stars and his energy wasn't growing as fast as he hoped. Knowing he had no clue how much time was left before disaster struck the world, he decided he needed to leave the Marquis estate for now. Yurin walked into his father's study and casually said he was planning to go out for a while. Wellington immediately paused his work, demanding to know why, since it had been ages since Yurin had traveled anywhere. He guessed his son just wanted to visit a nearby town. Yurin agreed, but kept quiet about how far he really planned to go, simply saying it would be about a week. Wellington nodded, thinking it made sense after all the training Yurin had done, then asked if he wanted to take his guards. Yurin surprised him by saying he didn't need any escorts. His father looked at him like he was crazy, reminding him he was the eldest son of the Marquis and couldn't just roam around alone. Yurin insisted it was just a quick trip to a nearby place, and that having guards would draw unwanted attention. Wellington snapped back, warning that the world was dangerous, and even though Yurin had gotten stronger, he still worried because of the poison incident. Yurin knew poisons couldn't hurt him now, but he saw arguing would waste the whole day, so he finally agreed to go along with his father's plan. His father asked when he planned to leave, and Yurin said he'd go in about 2 days. Wellington immediately decided to arrange a proper escort for him. Back in his room, Yurin sighed, thinking the escort was useless since he planned to sneak away early the next morning anyway. As night fell, Yurin called Peru over and told him he was going on a trip, but had no money, so he needed Peru to bring some coins. Yurin guessed Peru still had the pouch of coins Karox gave him for those expensive potions. When Yurin asked if Peru was planning to keep it, the nervous butler quickly said no, calling it an honor and promising to bring the money right away. Then Yurin asked what else Peru was hiding, since had seen the man had a subspace bag when delivering the poison herbs, a magical storage bag that could hold way more than normal. Peru hesitated but handed it over, and Yurin was glad, realizing he wouldn't need a regular backpack anymore. He also reminded Peru to bring along something that looked like medicine. Peru explained it was a month's supply of antidote for poison, and Yurin praised him, saying that if he kept this up, he might soon have the full cure, which made Peru smile brightly. The next morning, before dawn, Yurin got ready to slip away quietly, knowing he had to leave before the escort his father arranged showed up. Yurin moved silently through the mansion, slipping past without making a sound, as if the building itself was helping him escape. He thought he was lucky no one noticed, but a gardener saw him and quietly commented on how early it was. Yurin just nodded, though he felt something strange, a strong energy coming from the calm gardener who loved plants. Curious, he activated his creator's eye, and what he saw almost made him forget about running away. After traveling most of the morning, Yurin realized it was the first time he had left the Marquis castle since his visit to the magic tower. At the portal counter, the mage asked how he could help, and Yurin said he wanted to use the portal. The mage asked if he had used one before, and Yurin admitted he hadn't. A receptionist then explained their mileage system, which made Yurin think it was just like an airline's rewards program. When asked where he wanted to go, Yurin said AS Castle. The receptionist blinked and said that was very far, then told him the cost, 50 gold. Yurin thought the price was high, but figured it was okay since Peru had given him enough money. When it was time to sign the portal passport, Yurin casually used his gaming name, Polion. The mage then motioned for him to follow and led him into the portal room. The mage told Yurin that when he heard a knock, it would mean he had arrived. As Yurin stepped inside the portal room, he was surprised by how fancy the place looked. Suddenly, a bolt of lightning flashed across the castle, making him jump, but a calm mage told him he could step out now. He had reached his destination. Still puzzled, Yurin asked how he got there so fast without feeling anything, and the mage explained proudly that their portals were made to be smooth and painless. Yurin wondered if he had ever written teleportation that comfortable in his stories, but the mage just encouraged him to use their service again and wished him a good journey. When the doors opened, Yurin found himself in a new world, A.S. Castle. The buildings looked very different from those in the Marquis land, with a strong eastern style, and the busy streets were full of life. His first mission was to find the blacksmith district, so he asked someone passing by for directions and followed them until he reached a narrow alley where a small workshop was hidden. After looking around for a long time, Yurin sighed in frustration. He still hadn't found the famous unicorn blacksmith. The sky was darkening fast, and this was the final shop Yurin planned to visit before giving up. Inside, a single sword lay on an anvil as a blacksmith worked, hammering away. Yurin called out, and the man finally noticed him. After making sure Yurin was a customer, he asked what he wanted. Yurin quickly inquired if the blacksmith knew someone called the unicorn blacksmith. The man said he didn't know anyone by that name, making Yurin doubt if he had come to the right place, until the blacksmith mentioned that was actually the name he intended to use for his own shop soon. Curious, Yurin activated his creator's eye and saw the man's name was Jiranox, and that he had the rare talent of making demonic weapons, exactly who Yurin was searching for. Yurin asked if he could look around, and the blacksmith gestured toward the side. Yurin carefully examined the weapons and armor displayed on the walls, then casually asked how business was going. The blacksmith hesitated and admitted that since his shop was hidden at the far end of the alley and people didn't know about his skills, most visitors just glanced around and left without buying anything. He wasn't sure how long he could keep the shop open. Yurin found it amusing because the gear was amazing. He spotted a rapier infused with wind spirits that boosted speed and agility, and a longsword with fire spirits that increased both strength and stamina. Yurin asked if Jiranox had made the weapons himself, and the blacksmith admitted he did, but every time he finished a sword, it ended up being a disaster, so heavy that even experienced fighters couldn't lift them, which was why no one wanted to buy them. Yurin thought the problem was just that the wrong people had tried using them, and the blades would only show their true power when held by someone worthy. Since he still didn't fully grasp how true will worked, Yurin casually said he would take both swords. Jiranox insisted they were failures, but Yurin said they'd make perfect gifts for Aaron and Kraid, even though these weren't the treasures he originally came for. Yurin moved on and asked if the blacksmith had any old, rusty weapons lying around. Jiranox didn't understand why he'd want junk, so Yurin showed him a box full of dusty, worn-out tools. The blacksmith said he had planned to sell that scrap as a bulk lot since it was basically useless. Yurin picked up one particular piece, saying it was exactly what he was looking for. Jiranox watched and explained that he hadn't made that weapon. It had already been in the warehouse when he started working there, and he had no idea where it came from. Jiranox almost threw the dagger away as useless junk, but decided to keep it in the end. Yurin said he wanted to buy the dagger too, which made the blacksmith look surprised. Since Yurin was only choosing broken and old gear, Jiranox said the price would be just 2 gold, and the dagger would come as a free gift. Yurin felt like he'd found a hidden treasure. If these weapons ever showed their true power, they'd be worth way more than 200 gold. But more than the weapons, Yurin was interested in the blacksmith himself. So he pointed out how poorly Jiranox's shop was doing and suggested closing it down so Jiranox could work for him as his personal blacksmith. Jiranox was shocked by the sudden offer and didn't know how to respond. He didn't mind closing the shop, but the idea came completely out of nowhere. Yurin then decided to introduce himself properly, calling himself the undefeated spear who guarded the southern lands. When Jiranox heard the young master's title, he froze, dropped to his knees, and apologized, never expecting someone so important to visit his small workshop. Yurin told him to stand up, but Jiranox said he was comfortable kneeling and could talk better that way. Yurin told Jiranox to stand up, thinking the man was too stuck in old-fashioned ways. Jiranox asked why someone like Yurin would want a blacksmith he considered useless. Yurin said it was because Jiranox had a rare gift. But Jiranox denied having any talent, explaining that his master just forced him through tough, endless training. Yurin guessed it sounded like a harsh, Spartan-style upbringing. He said he had checked out many workshops that day and seen all kinds of weapons, but Jiranox's blades stood out, the shapes were precise, and the handles were made so well that a fighter would never drop them in battle. Because of that careful work, Yurin believed Jiranox would one day unlock an amazing skill. Yurin wondered if he could really bring Jiranox on his side. Jiranox agreed to follow the young master, even though he didn't live up to the rumors. Yurin asked if he meant the stories calling him worthless. To show a little fun, Yurin touched the dagger's tip with his finger and called forth its power with his blood, making the blade reveal itself as the Agnes relic of a million forms. The dagger slowly floated up into the air on its own. Jiranox watched, stunned, thinking it looked like some legendary ego sword. Yurin knew that in the original tale, this treasure was meant to be the hero's ultimate prize. The system asked if Yurin wanted to make a soul contract with Agnes, and he agreed right away. The soul showed up in a new form, sounding annoyed and asking who he was to try and bond with it. Yurin guessed it was upset because he didn't have any mana, but its rude tone was surprising. The weapon grumbled that it was crazy for someone like Yurin to want to connect with it. Yurin casually said a great prophet had told him to do it, though he completely made that up. Agnes shot back, wondering why a prophet would waste time on him. Still, it asked if he understood its powers, and Yurin said yes. Agnes was a relic that could change shape, splitting into a main part and a smaller form that could turn into anything the user imagined. In the original story, the hero used it as a sword and shield, and even if the smaller piece got lost, it would always come back to the main part. Agnes scoffed, saying Yurin didn't know how to use it since it needed mana to work. Yurin just stared, thinking it was a very chatty weapon. Then he pointed at it and decided to wear it like a ring. Agnes complained it felt hot, almost like it was melting, while Yurin noticed his inner energy blended well with its mana power. Yurin asked Jirinox how much longer he planned to stay in this rundown part of town, and the blacksmith said 2 days would do. They decided to meet at sunset in the main park of the castle grounds. On his way there, Yurin suddenly heard a familiar voice calling his name. Ilya appeared, questioning why he was here, leaving both of them puzzled. Looking around, Yurin realized the place felt strangely familiar. It was the same spot where the original hero had first met Ilya. She wondered why he seemed different, and Yurin apologized, feeling like the story had already gone off track. Ilya got off her horse and reminded him to answer a question. Yurin said he was looking for a blacksmith. She thought it odd since the Rox family had plenty of blacksmiths already. Yurin explained he wanted to hire one personally. Ilya said she could have helped if Head asked earlier, but Yurin told her Head already found someone promising. Just then, Jirinox showed up and greeted him. When asked if Head been waiting long, Yurin said the timing was perfect. He started to introduce Ilya as his fiancée, but before he could finish, someone urgently called out for the team leader. As they were getting ready to leave, the knights asked who the young man was. Ilya called over Musk and introduced him as her fiancé, Yurin Rox. Musk repeated the name nervously, surprised that someone from the powerful Rox family would show up here. He then introduced himself as Musk Malone, commander of the 5th Night Division under the Marquis. Yurin greeted him politely, but in his mind, he already knew Musk was just a forgettable minor character with no real importance. As Musk's group prepared to move, a group of kids suddenly ran into their path, and Yurin stepped forward to help, which quickly turned into a small fight. Ilya arrived just in time to stop the mess, and that moment marked the real start of their relationship. What really mattered was that in the original story, Yurin had joined Ilya on a dangerous mission and saved her life. Without him, her story would have taken a dark turn. He couldn't let that chance slip away. Calling to her, Yurin asked where she was going. Ilya explained that orc attacks were rising near AS Castle, and her team had been sent to deal with them. Hearing this, Yurin said he wanted to join the mission. When she asked why, he said he was still training and needed real battle experience to improve. She warned him it would be risky, but Yurin shrugged, saying he was at least very good at running away if needed. Ilya paused briefly before agreeing and told Musk to prepare a horse for Yurin. Musk hesitated, warning that this wasn't some easy trip and that orcs were dangerous, so they couldn't afford to be careless, especially since he sensed no mana from Yurin and didn't want to babysit anyone. But since it was an order, Musk reluctantly accepted, grumbling and giving Yurin a sharp, cutting glare. Yurin and Ilya exchanged a quiet glance before continuing. She reminded him that the mission was risky and told him to stick close. Yurin agreed without hesitation. He also told Jirinox to stay ready, and the blacksmith nodded. Soon, the whole group started moving out. When they reached their destination, Ilya said they would split into teams of 5 to look for the orc camp. No one was allowed to attack right away. If they found the village, they had to retreat quickly and signal with a flare. She showed the path her team would take, and everyone got moving. Hours passed as they searched, and by night, one soldier complained that the orc tracks were faint and hard to follow in the dark. Not sure what to do, he asked Ilya for orders. She decided they had to pull back for now. Suddenly, sharp flare signals rang out across the area, one, then another, and then several more, appearing along different trails. Ilya asked how many flares had been sent. A soldier counted 5, while Yurin whispered it was only 4. He hadn't finished counting yet. Without wasting time, Ilya chose to go toward the northwest flare first. They raced to the spot, but Ilya's face darkened when they arrived. Every soldier there lay still on the ground, completely wiped out, Ilya's team stood frozen, horrified by what they saw. Fallen soldiers whose armor looked like it had melted away from their bodies, with no clue when the attack had happened. Without delay, Ilya ordered everyone to race toward the southern flare, only to find the same grim scene waiting. Another group of soldiers completely wiped out. One knight urged her to hurry to the next signal, but Yurin suddenly stopped them, making Ilya puzzled as she called his name. Yurin explained the orcs weren't fighting directly, but were ambushing each team separately, turning any forward move into a deadly trap. He said their only choice was to end the mission and send a flare to call everyone back. Yurin added that the whole formation was a mess because someone reckless had messed things up, reminding himself bitterly of how the original hero had been blamed and cursed by readers for this exact failure, bringing back painful memories. Musk angrily snapped at Yurin, saying he knew nothing about war strategy, but Yurin stared him down and told him to be quiet, leaving Musk stunned and speechless. Suddenly, Musk collapsed, clutching his side as if struck by pain, but Ilya quickly reminded him this wasn't the moment to weaken, calling out to her fiancé and sharply warning her subordinate to watch his words. Musk immediately realized his error and begged for forgiveness, while Yurin remained silent, quietly watching everything unfold. Turning to Ilya, he remembered how, in the original tale, she hesitated and froze, so he encouraged her to think clearly and decide if this was really the time to hold back. She agreed that Yurin was right. Her mind had been clouded, and ordered a blue flare to be launched without delay to gather any survivors left. The bright signal shot high into the sky, lighting up the forest all around. Jirinox muttered that Yurin was amazing for acting so fast, but Yurin downplayed it. The blacksmith pointed out that reinforcements would arrive soon, but Yurin doubted it, believing most soldiers wouldn't return because the cursed Karuta was likely hunting them down. When Jirinox asked what was next, Yurin calmly said this was what a true battle looked like. Just then, a frantic soldier ran in, warning the leader to flee while there was still time. Ilya raised her sword toward the approaching sound, and moments later a massive horde of orcs stormed out of the shadows, far more than anyone had expected. Musk shouted that the number was unbelievable, and Ilya, shaken, apologized to Yurin for putting him in such danger. Yurin simply told her it was all right. Yurin told her not to worry, they weren't going down here today. She pressed him, wanting to know his plan. Calling on Agnes, he prepared to test the special skill he had practiced for 2 days, the Black Iron Burst, a powerful 3-star ability. He shaped a black iron pellet using a fake body and threw it into the charging orc horde. At first, the orcs laughed as the pellet bounced harmlessly off their weapons, but then it exploded with a deafening roar, wiping out dozens in an instant. With a quick gesture, Yurin pulled the glowing sphere back, impressed at how well Agnes' power combined with his own. The remaining orcs surged forward in anger, but Yurin threw the sphere again, causing another massive blast that tore through their ranks. He told everyone the spheres were made of black iron and promised to explain later, though the damage spoke for itself. The orcs were breaking fast. Ilya's eyes widened as she asked why her soldiers weren't moving. They needed to attack while they still had the chance. She charged forward, cutting down one orc, while her soldiers fought desperately to bring down another. In the distance, an orc froze in fear, suddenly noticing a huge red figure looming over him. Shaking, he looked up just as the creature grabbed his head with one enormous hand. Ilya and her group spun around at the sickening sound of bones cracking. She gasped, asking what kind of monster that was, as the giant crushed the orc skull like it was nothing. Yurin's face grew serious. Karuta, the legendary orc warrior, had finally arrived. If they didn't stop this arrogant beast today, none of them would survive to see another dawn. Karuta let out a fierce roar that shocked Ilya and the soldiers around her. He raised his massive sword, preparing for battle, then launched himself into the air, aiming a powerful strike straight at Ilya. She told herself to dodge, but before she could move, Yurin grabbed her from behind, questioning why she was frozen in place. The orc swung hard, but thanks to Yurin's quick reflexes, Ilya barely avoided the deadly blow. Yurin muttered that he almost died while Ilya tried to catch up to what had just happened. She then noticed her comrades lying defeated on the ground, knocked out by Karuta's attack. The orc's fierce eyes shifted to Yurin, who wasted no time throwing his black iron blast at the giant. The attack exploded loudly, but Karuta didn't even flinch. When the smoke cleared, the massive orc stood untouched, completely unharmed by the powerful strike. Yurin stared, surprised, realizing his attacks weren't working. He thought to himself that Karuta's skin was as hard as steel and that the orc's terrifying presence made him even more dangerous. Ilya cursed loudly at the orc for what it had done to her team, gripping her sword tightly and vowing she wouldn't forgive the beast. She charged forward, using her special attack to strike the orc, but Karuta managed to block her blow. As they battled fiercely, her soldiers cheered her on, impressed by her skill, while Yurin thought to himself that this was exactly why she was called the Sword Queen. Although the fight was still early in the story, Yurin was surprised to see Ilya pushing Karuta so hard, even cutting through parts of his steel-like skin and armor. Karuta, shocked to be hurt, suddenly unleashed a powerful magical aura, roaring loudly and filling the area with energy that stunned Ilya. She hadn't expected an orc to use magic like that. Then, stronger than before, Karuta launched a fierce attack at Ilya, and although she managed to block it, the effort drained all her strength. Yurin reflected that the scene matched the original novel exactly, where Ilya had been overpowered by Karuta and sent crashing back by the sheer force of the blow. Her followers rushed toward her in alarm, checking her condition as she struggled to push herself up, burdened by the shame of being unable to overcome a mere beast. Realizing the danger, she prepared to retreat, but at that instant Yurin suddenly stepped forward, leaving her stunned by his unexpected move. As the orc warrior hesitated in confusion, Yurin swiftly drew one of his daggers and, with a sharp motion, unleashed his precise throwing technique toward the enemy. The attack startled the orc, yet responded instantly, slicing through the flying blade and shattering it midair. Yurin was taken aback by how easily his carefully aimed weapon had been destroyed. Seeing this, the orc grew bolder, bursting into mocking laughter at Yurin's apparent weakness, until a strange glow appeared near its shoulder. Before any reaction was possible, a violent blast erupted, shaking the area. When the smoke dispersed, blood dripped to the ground, and Karuta was revealed clutching one shoulder, heavily injured and barely able to remain standing from the damage inflicted. Yurin advanced with a light laugh, clearly amused, as he revealed that the first blade had only been a decoy, thrown to distract the orc while the real strike followed unseen. With a sharp and calculating air, he noted that although the orc's hide resembled hardened metal, it was far from invulnerable everywhere. The idea of exposed points kept flashing through the gaps in the creature's armor, making it impossible for Yurin to ignore those openings. Karuta, seething with fury, reacted instantly and rushed straight toward him, catching Yurin off guard with a sudden burst of speed. A heavy blow followed, but Yurin narrowly slipped past it, evading the strike by a hair's breadth. The orc continued its relentless assault while Yurin danced away each time, until he countered by releasing another attack that detonated violently against the orc's body. Yurin maintained his laughter, clearly enjoying the exchange, while making it clear he would not allow the creature to corner him so easily. At that moment, Karuta shifted its gaze toward the nearby observer, Girinox, prompting Yurin to notice the change in focus. The orc began moving in the bystander's direction, alarming Yurin as the situation took a sudden turn. Without warning, the creature sprang into the air and brought its blade down toward Girinox, forcing Yurin to sprint forward as panic surged through his thoughts. Knowing he had no time to hesitate, he activated his ability and poured every ounce of his inner strength into the small dragon's treasure, pushing his body beyond its limits to gain speed. At the critical instant, just before the orc's strike could reach Girinox, Yurin used his enhanced speed to seize the bystander and pull him clear, slipping past the blow before it could connect. The attack slammed down with terrifying force, yet it struck nothing, leaving the orc stunned by the complete miss, while Ilya and her followers stared in disbelief at Yurin's overwhelming speed. After securing Girinox's safety, Yurin immediately shifted his focus back to Karuta, signaling that the battle was nearing its conclusion as he summoned his legendary ego sword, Agnes. With a calm yet confident presence, Yurin revealed a glowing butterfly in his hand, known as the Bloodflower Butterfly, one of the most dangerous hidden weapons of the four Heavenly Tang clan. He released the summoned creature forward, guiding it with precision as it carried out a curved attack pattern, circling its target with intent. The butterfly began spiraling around the orc warrior, its unpredictable movement leaving Karuta momentarily confused and unable to follow its path. Watching from aside, Ilya could not help but notice the creature's graceful beauty, while the orc's patience quickly wore thin. Growing irritated, Karuta lashed out repeatedly, swinging its weapon wildly in an attempt to destroy the butterfly. But each strike passed through empty air as the creature effortlessly avoided them. Suddenly, the butterfly settled gently onto the orc's body, causing Karuta to freeze for a split second. A sharp glow burst forth from the delicate wings, and in that instant the orc realized the danger too late, as a massive explosion erupted, unleashing a devastating blow that engulfed the warrior completely. Yurin already understood how it would end, while Ilya stood frozen, shocked by the sudden outcome before her eyes. Yurin reflected inwardly that although he had not been completely certain, the immense force he poured into the bloodflower butterfly was more than enough to punch straight through the orc warrior's chest, and the result proved that judgment correct. Ilya and her followers were stunned by the victory they had just witnessed, but Ilya quickly regained her composure and stopped them, reminding them that the battle was not truly finished yet. Their attention shifted to the remaining orcs, who stood trembling in place after watching their leader fall so brutally. Without hesitation, Ilya signaled her subordinates to eliminate every last one of them. Jirinox soon expressed his gratitude toward Yurin for saving his life, while Yurin quietly acknowledged to himself that his first genuine battle had ended without disaster. Sometime later, night settled over the area, and Yurin checked on Ilya's condition. She was clearly injured, though she endured it calmly, aware that her life had been spared and that complaining would serve no purpose. Yurin considered their actions natural under the circumstances, as cooperation was the only reason they survived, before smoothly shifting the discussion back to a question she had raised earlier. He explained that swords were not his chosen weapons, and that his true training lay in the use of concealed tools. Ilya, curious from the start, interpreted this to mean blades, such as daggers, her interest in Yurin only deepening after everything she had witnessed. Yurin confirmed it, explaining that both the earlier exploding sphere and the butterfly used at the end were part of his arsenal of concealed weapons, leaving Ilya visibly shaken by how destructive such tools could be. Yurin reflected quietly that her reaction made sense, since she had grown up believing the sword stood above all other weapons, and he hoped that witnessing this battle would expand her understanding beyond that belief. One of Ilya's followers soon informed her that the magic pouch was ready, and after hearing this, Ilya decided that while collecting every corpse would take too long, claiming the leader's head was necessary. With a clean strike, she severed the orc commander's head and lifted it, momentarily stunned by its sheer size. A subordinate pointed out that placing it inside as it was might stain the pouch, but Ilya dismissed the concern, reminding them that such pouches existed specifically to hold the heads of fallen enemy leaders. She then noted how late it had become and instructed everyone to begin the return. Just as they turned to leave, their movement halted abruptly when Musk appeared ahead of them, accompanied by several other figures standing silently in their path. The moment Ilya spotted Musk, she immediately questioned his absence, noting that the signal flare had been released long ago. Musk explained that their unit had pushed too far ahead and ended up walking straight into an orc ambush, and by the time they managed to break free, they had already lost precious time. Ilya accepted the delay, but quickly noticed something wrong, asking why only 2 people had returned instead of the full group. Musk revealed that the others had all been killed, admitting that the orcs were far more powerful than anticipated. Unwilling to accept this without proof, Ilya insisted on seeing the fallen herself and demanded to be taken to their bodies. Musk tried to stop her, arguing that the night was too deep and suggesting they wait until morning, but Ilya refused to back down and repeated her demand to go immediately. Letting out a slow breath, Musk claimed he would first explain their positioning, saying there was no alternative. At that exact moment, as he finished speaking, he suddenly drew his weapon and lunged toward Ilya, catching her completely off guard. Before the strike could land, a dagger flashed through the air, and Musk's arm was severed in an instant, the attack coming from Yurin without hesitation. Musk collapsed to the ground, screaming in agony, while Yurin stared down at him with a chilling calm and pointed out that despite claiming to have battled orcs, there was not a single trace of green blood on him, only the red of humans. Yurin made it clear that such a clumsy deception would never fool him and pressed further, exposing that Musk had been working with the enemy all along and feeding them information from the very beginning. Musk reacted in shock, realizing that his betrayal had already been uncovered, while Yurin silently reminded himself that this was a story he knew better than anyone else. Hearing everything, Ilya stepped forward without hesitation and drew her blade, causing Musk to panic as he desperately tried to cling to old loyalties and past contributions. Ilya dismissed those excuses as meaningless and swiftly ended his life, refusing to allow betrayal to go unpunished. She then immediately ordered her soldiers to capture the remaining accomplice who had arrived with Musk. By the following day, within the noble quarters of Assi Castle, a familiar voice repeatedly called out to Yurin, addressing him as a young master. After being stirred awake by the persistent calls, Yurin opened his eyes and looked toward Jirinox, calmly asking what had happened to disturb him so early. Jirinox urged Yurin to get up, pointing out that it was already close to midday and informing him that Captain Ilya had arrived to see him. Ilya appeared soon after, dressed elegantly in a refined black outfit, and greeted him with a composed yet warm presence, leaving Yurin momentarily unsure of the situation. Still half confused, Yurin wondered why she was dressed so formally, but Ilya's expression quickly shifted as she explained that they needed to head to her family residence. Her words only deepened Yurin's confusion until she hesitantly revealed that her father had specifically instructed her to bring Yurin along. With a slightly embarrassed look, she made it clear that she was hoping he would accompany her. As Yurin looked at her more closely, he found himself thinking that the stories describing her as the most beautiful woman in the world were not exaggerated in the slightest, and he agreed without hesitation to go with her. According to the original story, this was the moment when the main character saved Ilya and was later introduced to Marquis Marcus. Ilya then informed Yurin that she would wait for him outside and told him to prepare himself before coming out. While checking his status, Yurin was surprised to see just how much her favor toward him had increased from a single act of help. A short while later, Ilya stood waiting outside, and Yurin soon joined her, expressing regret for the delay and signaling that they could finally set off together. At that moment, voices rang out from the crowd, cheering loudly and calling themselves fortunate to witness the iron-blooded knight Ilya, the warrior who had stood her ground alone against a fearsome orc. Ilya responded with calm waves to those supporters, while Yurin quietly reflected that the title of Iron-Blooded Knight had been granted to her because she never retreated, even when death stood directly before her, exactly as it had been described in the novel. As his gaze drifted aside, Yurin froze in confusion when he noticed many women shouting his name as well, calling him the Steel Magician, praising his looks, and showering him with gratitude. The unfamiliar title left him momentarily stunned. Thinking it over, Yurin concluded that the rumors must have spread through the accounts of the soldiers who survived the battle, and after witnessing his steel spheres, people had likely mistaken him for someone who wielded metal through magic. Just then, Ilya turned toward him, drawing his attention, and once again expressed her gratitude for saving her life twice. Yurin brushed it off inwardly, believing that helping one another in such moments was only natural and not something that required repeated acknowledgement. Ilya then explained that at first light that morning, she had taken her troops back into the forest to retrieve the bodies of those who had fallen. She described how devastating it was to see her soldiers remain scattered and torn apart among the trees, and with tears welling in her eyes, she admitted that one truth became painfully clear to her. If Yurin had not been there the previous day, she knew she would have met the same tragic end. Yurin listened without a word, allowing her to continue as she vowed to push herself harder than ever and grow far stronger. With renewed resolve, she made it clear that she intended to surpass all limits and would never allow herself to be defeated again. Hearing this, Yurin quietly reflected that from this moment onward, Ilya would finally awaken her true potential and mature into a warrior worthy of her destined title, the Sword Empress. Soon after, one of the mages mentioned that the Marcus estate was not far from Assi Castle. But before he could continue, Ilya cut in and explained that her father had already arranged for the family mages to transport them in comfort. She then indicated that it was time for them to leave. As the mages began reciting their spells, a portal instantly formed, leaving both Yurin and Jirinox startled by the sudden display. Ilya then calmly noted that they had entered her domain and remarked that it had been quite some time since Yurin last set foot in this place. Yurin felt a jolt of surprise as the surroundings shifted instantly, the scenery changing in a blink, and a wave of dizziness washed over him from the lingering effects of teleportation. Still feeling unsteady, he heard Jirinox wonder aloud whether all noble houses were this vast and extravagant, though Yurin could barely focus while fighting the nausea. A short while later, as Yurin had just his clothing, he realized from the situation that he was likely being led to a formal meal. In the original story, the protagonist had been served nothing but Shireen soup every single day at the Marquis residence. But this time Yurin believed he would finally taste proper noble cuisine, a thought that lifted his mood as he made his way toward the dining hall. Upon arrival, he was warmly welcomed by a man who invited him inside, revealing himself to be none other than Ilya's father, Marquis Marcus. As Yurin acknowledged him respectfully, the Marquis waved away excessive manners and motioned for him to sit, which Yurin promptly did. The Marquis then expressed that there was something he needed to say first, leaving Yurin slightly taken aback by the seriousness of his tone. He explained that before Ilya was connected to Yurin in any formal way, she was first and foremost his daughter, and for that reason alone, he was deeply grateful that Yurin had saved her life. Yurin accepted this calmly, believing his actions were simply what the situation demanded. Just then, a servant announced that the food had arrived, and Yurin's anticipation rose as the dishes were revealed. However, that excitement quickly turned into disbelief when he discovered that the meal placed before him was none other than the Marcus family's signature chiarane soup once again. Yurin's expression clearly showed his dismay as the Marquis explained that while the dish resembled the version served by the Rox family, the Marcus household's recipe was far richer, enhanced by their own closely guarded broth. After encouraging him to eat, Yurin, despite his disappointment, accepted the meal with proper gratitude. As Yurin slowly ate, the Marquis suddenly shifted the conversation and raised an unexpected question about Yurin's plans for marriage, catching him completely off guard. Unsure he had heard correctly, Yurin asked for the question to be repeated, only for the Marquis to clearly bring up the matter of when he intended to wed Ilya. The question left Ilya visibly flustered, her face instantly turning red from embarrassment. Yurin sensed that this might be a deliberate test, recalling the Marquis' status and realizing that such lingering displeasure, even after saving Ilya, suggested the man had initially held a poor opinion of him. Understanding what kind of response was required, Yurin straightened his expression and declared that if it were possible, he would marry Ilya immediately. Ilya reacted at once, stunned by his sudden declaration and completely at a loss over what he meant. Yurin then explained that he had not yet been acknowledged as the successor of his family, and that the reputation he earned from his reckless behavior in the past still caused others to view him with distrust. He stated that in order to truly stand beside Ilya, he intended to change himself completely, and once he was officially recognized as the heir, he would make her his wife. Ilya was left stunned by his resolve, while the Marquis questioned whether such a goal was realistic, reminding him that Yurin's younger brothers were famous for their exceptional talent. He challenged Yurin, asking if he genuinely believed he could rise above them and claim the position. Yurin responded without hesitation, his confidence clear as he affirmed that he would succeed. The Marquis burst into laughter, remarking that Yurin had indeed transformed just as the rumors claimed, and he declared that he would lend his support to him from now on. Shifting the discussion, the Marquis mentioned that a message had arrived from Willington shortly before Yurin's visit. He explained that Yurin's actions had already reached the ears of Rox, likely delivered through long-distance magic. Though surprised, Yurin asked what his father's response had been. The Marquis explained that Yurin's father wished to speak with him directly later using communication magic, and after the meal, someone would guide Yurin to the appropriate chamber. Yurin accepted the news with visible concern and expressed his thanks, but as he turned his attention back to Ilya, he noticed that she had begun to pout once again, leaving him quietly puzzled by her mood. Yurin chose to set the matter aside, quietly concluding that he had at least succeeded in earning Marquis Marcus approval. Not long after, inside the communication chamber, a mage activated the spell to contact House Rox through a crystal sphere. The orb suddenly burst with light, and from within it appeared Yurin's father, his expression twisted with anger. Seeing the image, Yurin could not help but think that the scene resembled a strange beam-style projection, much like a distant call. Unsure how to begin, Yurin froze for a moment as his father's fury filled the room, then immediately showed remorse for his actions. Despite his anger, Yurin's father quickly checked whether his son had suffered any injuries, and Yurin reassured him that he was completely unharmed. After clearing his throat, his father sharply questioned him, demanding to know whether the rumors were true about saving Ilya and defeating the Orc commander. Yurin hesitated before responding, downplaying everything by claiming it had only been a matter of fortunate timing. His father clearly did not fully accept that explanation, but decided to leave the details for later and instead asked when Yurin planned to return home. Yurin informed him that he would be back the day after tomorrow, which noticeably pleased his father. Just as the tension seemed to ease, his father added one final instruction, telling Yurin to bring his brothers along upon his return, a request that left Yurin staring ahead in complete shock. Bathed in the amber glow of sunset, the lavish salon of the Marquis estate exuded quiet elegance, where three figures occupied an ornate seating arrangement. The Marquis reclining comfortably at the center, Ilya composed at his side, and Yurin seated upright across from them with measured poise. A hint of surprise crossed the Marquis' expression upon learning of Yurin's intention to depart as early as the following day, his tone softening as he expressed a desire for him to remain longer given the long gap since their last reunion. Yurin, however, maintained a respectful demeanor, acknowledging the sentiment while explaining that he had been entrusted with a responsibility by his father that could not be delayed. The Marquis responded with his usual easy generosity, lamenting the timing yet offering to arrange warp magic to ease the journey, a gesture that drew a faint, controlled chuckle from Yurin as he masked his inner thoughts behind a courteous smile. Leaning slightly forward, he conveyed his gratitude but firmly declined the offer, prompting a flicker of curiosity in the Marquis' gaze. Yurin then elaborated that he intended to travel and train through hardship rather than rely on convenience, a response that soon gave way to the Marquis' broad grin as he remarked on how much Yurin had changed and how intriguing it would be to witness his growth. Ilia's gentle smile followed, met with Yurin's calm nod of thanks, and as she turned away, a subtle warmth lingered on her lips, something Yurin observed with quiet astonishment as he realized she had begun smiling again, perhaps signaling genuine approval of his choice this time, though beneath that decision lay a deeper, unspoken motive. By the next morning, under a clear and vibrant sky, Yurin stood at the estate gates with his cloak secured, his presence carrying a renewed sense of purpose as he called for Jirnox to follow, who approached with his pack slung over one shoulder and cautiously sought confirmation of their destination, only to receive a simple nod before indicating the main road ahead as their path forward. Yurin shook his head, making it clear that their journey held another stop before the capital, his gaze drifting toward a distant mountain ridge rising beside the marquee estate as he indicated it as their true destination. At the sight of it, Jirnox reacted with visible surprise, quickly recognizing it as the infamous Dragon's Lair, a place surrounded by both legend and curiosity. The name lingered briefly in Yurin's mind while Jirnox, growing animated, recalled having visited it once before opening his forge, his curiosity surfacing with an almost childlike eagerness as he tried to guess the reason behind this detour. Yurin dismissed the assumption without hesitation, his response firm, though a faint, knowing smile appeared as his thoughts turned inward toward his real objective. He was not heading there to make wishes, but to seize a hidden treasure known only to him, something originally meant for the story's protagonist. The two continued along a dirt path, their steps steady as the estate's polished roads gradually faded into forest terrain, guiding them toward the ancient cavern once inhabited by dragons. After climbing a small rise, they reached the vine-covered entrance, where early visitors had already gathered, leaving offerings in quiet devotion. Jirnox stared in disbelief at the number of people present so early, concern creeping in as he wondered if anything valuable could remain. Yurin, however, remained unfazed, his eyes briefly scanning the scattered trinkets near the entrance before dismissing them as worthless imitations, leaving Jirnox confused. Stepping closer to the vine-draped opening, Yurin examined the stonework with a subtle smirk, his gaze suggesting knowledge hidden beneath the surface. Moving past the crowd, he signaled for Jirnox to follow as he led them along a path circling the mountain, prompting Jirnox to hurry after him. The climb soon grew difficult, forcing them over uneven rocks and along a narrow ledge until Jirnox, slightly out of breath, pointed toward a bare cliff face that seemed empty, while Yurin fell silent, his eyes sharpening as realization began to set in. He stepped toward an uneven stone slab, sensing at once that this was the place, the concealed entrance he himself had once devised, its mechanism shaped like the handle of a car door. After a brief glance around to ensure no one was watching, he pressed his palm against the surface and treated it as he would a door, triggering a faint vibration as the rock responded and a thin seam split open. Startled, Jirnox staggered back in disbelief, while Yurin merely allowed a faint smile to surface before signaling him to follow. They slipped through the narrow opening, which sealed shut behind them with a heavy rumble, enclosing them within a dim interior lit by the soft glow of moss and aged sconces. Jirnox looked around in amazement, clearly struck by how bright the space was, his attention quickly drawn to a cluster of shimmering crystals that he eagerly mistook for gemstones. Yurin halted him at once, warning that any contact would activate a trap, causing Jirnox to freeze as unease set in and he anxiously wondered what kind of danger lay hidden. Yurin, calmly observing the patterns etched around them, concluded that it would likely engulf the entire cave in flames, leaving no chance of survival. Moving forward with caution, he reminded Jirnox that many more traps remained and urged him to stay close, which Jirnox did with visible tension. Their careful advance eventually brought them into a wide chamber centered on a low stone pedestal, and Yurin recognized that they had reached their destination. Jirnox circled it in fascination, finding it impressive yet strangely empty, prompting Yurin to gesture toward it as if pointing out something unseen beneath. Confused, Jirnox struggled to understand, while Yurin revealed that this was merely a false dragon's lair, and beyond its boundary, he could sense the presence of those outside, unknowingly directing their prayers toward this very spot. Left in quiet confusion, Jirnox could only watch as Yurin brought his hands together once, signaling that it was time to uncover the treasure. As the word lingered in the air, Yurin knelt and reached beneath the pedestal, pulling a concealed handle, and with a deep rumble, the stone lid shifted aside to reveal several tightly packed sacks hidden within. Girinox drew in a sharp breath at the sight, instantly recognizing the contents as gold coins, while Yurin reached past them and retrieved a small black box, knowing it held something far more valuable. As he opened it, a soft radiance spilled across his fingers, and an interface revealed its identity as the warrior's jade with a rebirth effect, an artifact crucial for power and growth. He closed it without delay and directed Girinox to gather the gold into a magic pouch, a command that was followed without question. Soon after, they stepped back into daylight, moving through the thinning crowd of departing visitors, where Girinox turned his attention to what lay ahead. Yurin indicated that warps to his castle's Tower of Magic could be accessed from there, and Girinox accepted this with a quiet nod. A faint smile crossed Girinox's face as he observed the busy roads despite the early hour, letting out a soft laugh. But the moment shifted abruptly as Yurin's expression tightened and his breath faltered. A chilling sense of unease settled over him, his instincts warning that something was deeply wrong. From within the crowd, a hooded figure advanced, its mere presence carrying an overwhelming pressure that felt suffocating. Without hesitation, Yurin activated the eye of the creator, and recognition struck him instantly. The woman approaching them was not meant to appear at this point, her existence belonging far later in the story, making her presence here feel completely impossible. Girinox's concern grew as he noticed the sudden change, but Yurin could barely respond, his focus fixed on the oppressive aura that made it clear she was far beyond anything he could face. The conclusion formed in an instant, leaving no room for doubt as he realized escape was the only option. Acting on impulse, he abruptly moved away, using a casual excuse to conceal his urgency, while Girinox hurried after him, struggling to keep pace. Far behind, the cloaked woman turned slightly, her attention drawn as though something about the moment had caught her interest. Later, within the vast interior of the castle, Yurin sat alone on his bed, unable to shake the lingering unease that something had gone terribly out of place. His thoughts returned again and again to the mysterious figure, certain that her appearance defied everything he knew about the story's progression, the inconsistency weighing heavily on his mind. A deep frown settled on his face as he questioned why such a powerful presence had emerged so early and in such an unlikely location, his gaze eventually drifting toward a luminous pill resting quietly inside a box. He briefly considered that the creature might have been after the treasure hidden within the Divine Dragon Cave, something that was never meant to occur until much later in the story, and the realization slowly settled in that the narrative he once knew was beginning to shift in unpredictable ways. What troubled him further was the complete absence of the true protagonist, with no signs, no rumors, and no trace of their movements anywhere. Forcing those thoughts aside, he reached for the pill and swallowed it without hesitation, only for an intense heat to erupt within him as a surge of blue energy coursed violently through his veins. He immediately dropped into a cross-legged position, steadying his breath as he struggled to guide the overwhelming force, while a system message appeared, announcing the start of his transformation, followed by another confirming that his body was undergoing rapid strengthening. He understood that power was no longer optional but necessary, and that he needed to acquire it as quickly as possible. Time slipped by in silence as he remained in deep meditation, until the first light of morning filtered through the window, and upon opening his eyes, a new message awaited him, declaring that he had attained a heavenly martial body. A wide grin spread across his face as he quietly celebrated his fortune, recognizing it as the legendary physique spoken of in countless tales, perfectly suited for combat involving blades or bare hands, and even capable of replicating techniques after witnessing them once. Rising to his feet, he immediately felt the difference, his body lighter and stronger than before, when a knock suddenly echoed from the door and Girinox's voice came from outside, asking for permission to enter. Yurin granted it, and as Girinox stepped inside, prepared to mention breakfast, he instead froze in place, staring in disbelief as he noticed the change. Struggling to process it, he pointed out that Yurin appeared taller than before, while Yurin attempted to dismiss it casually, though Girinox remained unconvinced, insisting with firm confidence that his trained eye as a blacksmith did not make such mistakes. He firmly maintained that Yurin had measured 178 centimeters the previous day and now stood closer to 182, leaving Yurin slightly unsettled as he muttered that Girinox's precision was not something to dismiss lightly. After preparing themselves and finishing breakfast, they made their way toward the Grand Magic Tower, where a receptionist welcomed them politely and inquired about their purpose. Yurin stated his intention to use the warp gate, prompting the man to respond with a courteous smile as he asked for their destination, which Yurin identified as the capital. At that, the man's expression shifted, and he explained that entry to the capital was restricted, reserved for nobility, and inaccessible to ordinary individuals without proper authorization. Without delay, Yurin revealed his identity, presenting himself as Yurin Rox, the eldest son of the Marquis family, and introducing Jirinox as his personal blacksmith. His words quickly drew attention, as nearby magicians overheard and began to gather, recognizing him as the famed steel mage. Slightly embarrassed by the sudden attention, Yurin rubbed the back of his head while acknowledging their recognition, only to find himself surrounded as questions came pouring in about his abilities, the nature of his iron projectiles, their explosive force, the formulas behind them, and how he controlled his targets. Before he could respond, the sharp crack of a wooden staff striking the floor cut through the noise, and in an instant, both he and Jirinox vanished, reappearing within a grand and opulent hall. Disoriented, they scanned their surroundings, uncertain of how they had been transported, when an elderly man nearby offered an apology, explaining that a student had acted out of line. Yurin, unable to place him, questioned his identity, observing his magician's attire and the staff he carried, crowned with a glowing red orb, as the man introduced himself as Yubian, head of the Is Castle Magic Tower Council, a name that caused Yurin's expression to tighten in recognition. He recalled having created Yubian purely for amusement, designing him as a seemingly kind and gentle elder on the surface, while knowing all too well that beneath that facade lay a ruthless figure who would eliminate anyone who provoked him without hesitation. The thought of encountering two such dangerous individuals in such a short span sent a faint chill through Yurin, making the situation feel increasingly unsettling. Yubian then informed them that he would send them directly to the capital from within that very room, a gesture that Yurin accepted with quiet gratitude. As Yubian approached the warp device, he suddenly paused and glanced back, a dark smile forming as if hinting that their paths would cross again, a notion that immediately soured Yurin's expression as he inwardly hoped to avoid any future meeting. Without warning, a bolt of lightning struck the tower, and moments later, the warp activated, pulling them away and delivering them to the capital. Once there, they moved through the bustling streets, where Jirinox reacted with open amazement at the refined architecture and the elegance displayed by the citizens, prompting Yurin to hand him money and urge him to acquire more suitable clothing. Their path eventually led them to the Royal Knight Academy, an institution that resembled a grand university in scale and presence, where Yurin approached the gate and requested entry. The guard asked for his identity and purpose, and Yurin introduced himself while stating that he had come to see his brother, Colin Rox, after which they were allowed inside. As he ventured further into the academy grounds, a voice called out to him from the side, drawing his attention to a well-dressed man with striking silver hair. Yurin acknowledged his identity, and the man examined him closely before questioning whether he was the same individual known for defeating an orc warrior, making Yurin realize how quickly news spread within the capital. A faint smile appeared on the man's lips as he remarked on Yurin's apparent strength, leaving Yurin slightly taken aback by the man's casual tone. He responded with polite composure, acknowledging the compliment before asking for the man's identity, and soon learned that he was Carrick Elian, the second son of the Duke Elian family, as well as a close associate of Colin, after which Carrick turned and began leading him further inside, indicating that they would meet Colin ahead. Even so, Yurin sensed something subtly off about him, prompting him to quietly instruct Jirinox to stay behind before continuing alone. As they moved deeper into the academy, Carrick brought up the circulating rumors, noting that Yurin had not faced the orc warrior alone, but had fought alongside Lady Ilia, whose reputation as a rising knight was already well established, making her involvement expected, while Yurin's role remained far more mysterious. He continued by pointing out how little was truly known about Yurin and questioned whether he actually relied on magic in battle, to which Yurin clarified that he was not a mage. At that moment, a faint and fleeting smile crossed Carrick's face, carrying a hint of something unreadable before he fell silent again, leaving Yurin to dwell on the exchange. A quiet unease settled in as Yurin questioned what Carrick might be planning, uncertain whether the subtle expression he had noticed was real or imagined. Eventually, they arrived at a vast training hall, its patterned floor marked with circles and filled with students practicing sword techniques, their movements sharp as blades caught the light. Among them, a blue-haired student paused and approached Carrick, who asked if Colin had been seen, only for the student to respond with confusion, indicating that Carrick himself had already taken Colin to meet a professor. Realization struck Yurin at once, irritation rising as it became clear that Carrick had deliberately separated him from his brother and brought him here alone. The student's attention then shifted toward Yurin, curiously asking about his identity, and Carrick promptly introduced him as Lord Yurin Rox, Colin's elder brother, further adding that he was known for helping subdue the orc warrior alongside Lady Ilia. With deliberate flair, Carrick emphasized that Yurin was not a mage at all, highlighting that he relied solely on his own physical ability, no different from the others present, and that single remark was enough to ignite a surge of curiosity among the students. They quickly gathered around, questions spilling out in rapid succession, some recalling rumors of him wielding daggers, while others spoke of strange projectiles and even unusual techniques involving objects like butterflies. Taking on the role of a spokesperson, Carrick proposed that Yurin might demonstrate his abilities to satisfy the growing interest, and though irritation simmered beneath the surface, Yurin ultimately accepted. Soon, he found himself standing at the center of the hall opposite a student named Meilai, as the surrounding crowd formed a wide circle, their attention fixed on the impending exchange. Carrick casually noted that Meilai's skill level was considered average among them, then paused upon noticing the wooden sword in Yurin's hand, briefly questioning the choice before accepting the explanation that it suited the nature of this non-lethal bout. As the moment settled, Yurin observed the gathered faces and recognized them as nobles of high standing, sensing clearly the dismissive attitude they had held toward him since his arrival, judging him for his unconventional fighting style. He pushed the thought aside, deciding that such opinions would soon change, and resolved to use this opportunity to test the limits of his newly acquired heavenly martial body. A faint, unseen force seemed to stir around him as he stepped forward, gripping the wooden sword with quiet focus, while across from him, Meilai stood brimming with confidence, fully convinced of his advantage. Without hesitation, Yurin moved first, raising his blade into a straightforward overhead stance before bringing it down in a clean, direct strike. The simplicity of the attack caught Meilai off guard for a brief instant, forcing him to react hastily as he lifted his own sword to intercept, and in the next moment, the wooden blades met with a sharp collision. Meilai's strength proved utterly inadequate, as Yurin's strike forced his blade back with such force that it rebounded straight into his face, sending a sharp gasp through the hall. The watching students, along with Carrick, froze in disbelief as Meilai collapsed to the ground, a swelling mark already forming on his forehead, defeated by nothing more than a single, basic blow. Attempting to recover the situation, Carrick quickly suggested that Meilai had simply let his guard slip, then pushed for another match, calling forward a student named Rula. He introduced him as a far stronger fighter, ranking somewhere between mid and upper level, and cautioned him not to repeat the same mistake. Rula responded with clear confidence, brushing off any comparison to Meilai as he stepped forward. The two took their positions, and at Carrick's signal, the duel began. Rula launched himself forward immediately, but to Yurin's heightened perception, the charge appeared sluggish, highlighting just how greatly his heavenly martial body had enhanced him. Without changing tactics, Yurin executed the same simple motion, raising his sword overhead before bringing it down in a precise, direct strike. Rula reacted quickly, attempting to block, yet the overwhelming force behind Yurin's attack crushed through his defense, driving his blade back into his own face just as before. Carrick stood motionless in shock as Rula collapsed in the same manner, leaving Yurin standing calmly over him. Within, Yurin acknowledged the immense boost granted by his transformed body, recognizing the surge in strength, speed, and reflexes that had elevated him far beyond ordinary limits. With a faint edge of cold disdain, he remarked that the Knight Academy appeared to produce only weak fighters, a statement that struck Carrick deeply. Provoked by the insult, Carrick immediately declared a new challenge, announcing that he himself would step forward as the strongest fighter present. Yurin accepted without hesitation, his confidence unshaken as both prepared themselves. Carrick gathered his energy, his muscles coiling with power before he burst into motion, circling Yurin at high speed and leaving blurred afterimages across the arena. Carrick's display drew clear admiration from the surrounding students, yet Yurin remained completely unmoved, standing his ground with quiet patience as he waited for the right moment. The instant Carrick believed he had found an opening, he surged forward to strike, but Yurin's heightened perception, sharpened by his heavenly martial body, read the attack effortlessly. With a subtle shift and a precise step along a narrow angle, he slipped cleanly out of its path, then raised his sword once more and brought it down with overwhelming force. Carrick attempted to defend, but the sheer power behind the blow shattered his guard and drove straight into him, sending him crashing down just like the others before him. Yurin stood over him in silence, victorious, while the gathered students remained frozen, unable to process what they had witnessed. The stillness was soon broken by a voice from beyond the crowd, questioning the commotion and the reason for the gathering, and at the sight of the newcomer, Murmurs spread as several recognized Lord Colin's arrival. Colin looked over the scene with confusion, repeating his question as his gaze settled on Yurin, whom he failed to recognize, prompting him to question the stranger's identity. Yurin observed him quietly, realizing this was the famed sword prodigy and his younger brother, Colin Rux. A purple-haired student stepped forward to clarify that the unfamiliar figure was in fact Yurin himself, having come to visit, which left Colin visibly puzzled as he glanced around, asking where his brother actually was. The explanation was repeated with equal confusion, pointing directly at Yurin, yet Colin dismissed it outright, convinced it was some kind of joke, insisting that the tall and refined man before him could not possibly be the same person he remembered. However, as he examined him more closely, doubt began to creep in, his expression shifting as disbelief gave way to unease, and he questioned how such a drastic change was possible. Yurin responded calmly, attributing it to nothing more than losing some weight. Colin remained frozen in place, clearly shaken, as the difference before him was far beyond anything a simple change could explain, with Yurin not only appearing leaner, but also noticeably taller. Yurin brushed it off casually, attributing even the increase in height to the same transformation, though the explanation did little to settle Colin's thoughts. His attention soon shifted to the students lying unconscious across the floor, prompting him to question what had happened, and the purple-haired student stepped in once more to recount the entire sequence of events. As the explanation unfolded, disbelief deepened across Colin's face, and by the end, he turned back to Yurin, pressing further as he sought confirmation of the rumor about subduing an orc warrior, which Yurin affirmed with a steady nod. A complex mix of emotions surfaced within Colin, but before he could fully process them, Yurin's demeanor shifted, his tone turning cold as he challenged Colin's lack of respect toward him. Colin reacted sharply, unable to accept the sudden change in strength, his frustration spilling over as he rejected the idea of acknowledging Yurin as an older brother, reducing the difference between them to nothing more than a matter of age. That response ignited a colder intensity in Yurin, who stepped forward without hesitation, making his challenge unmistakably clear. Colin met it with a mocking confidence, clearly eager to engage. But just as the confrontation was about to begin, Yurin interrupted and proposed a wager, setting the condition that the loser would owe the winner a single wish. The suggestion gave Colin pause, yet after a brief moment, he accepted with firm resolve and prepared himself. As he signaled for a wooden sword, the purple-haired student leaned in once more, speaking quickly at his side, likely revealing how easily Yurin had defeated the others. When the duel finally began, Colin released a powerful aura, making it clear he intended to fight seriously, and Yurin recognized it in silence, almost as if he had been expecting nothing less. Colin's talent was undeniable, his movements refined with level 2 sword techniques and equally advanced agility, further reinforced by the rare Sword Emperor trait that marked him as a natural-born prodigy. Yet despite all that, the hostility he directed toward Yurin remained cold and unyielding. He surged forward with explosive speed, closing the distance in an instant. But Yurin observed the approach with complete composure, calmly breaking down every possible angle and outcome, already certain that defeat was not a possibility. With a smooth execution of the small dragon step, he shifted aside and positioned himself to counter. Though unlike before, he deliberately held back from ending it immediately, choosing instead to teach rather than overwhelm. The exchange stretched on for 10 intense minutes, a relentless sequence of strikes, evasions, counters, and precise blows landing repeatedly against Colin, gradually wearing him down. What began as shock among the watching students slowly transformed into awe, as Yurin's dominance became impossible to ignore. Eventually, exhaustion and frustration forced Colin to yield, though the lingering edge in his attitude did not escape Yurin's notice, prompting a light yet deliberate strike that made Colin flinch, tears forming as the pain settled in. Yurin lowered his blade toward him, issuing a firm warning that any further defiance would be met with far harsher consequences. Humbled at last, Colin straightened his posture, only to be met with another demand, that from this point onward, he was to address Yurin with proper respect as his elder. The command left him visibly shaken, his hesitation clear, but a slight lift of Yurin's sword was enough to silence any resistance, forcing immediate compliance. With the duel concluded, Yurin declared their departure, and Colin, still struggling to process everything, could only ask where they were headed next. Yurin revealed that their next destination was the Empire, where their youngest brother Rayon resided, and sometime later, a radiant portal within a towering magic structure carried them directly into the capital. Jirinox watched the teleportation with open amazement, once again struck by how effortlessly the magic tower could transport people across vast distances, while Yurin explained that such towers existed as neutral forces in every nation, powerful and ever-present across the continent. The city that greeted them appeared strikingly modern, filled with grand structures that rose with bold and imposing design, and their journey eventually led them to the gates of the Empire Knight Academy. There, Yurin instructed Colin to bring Rayon, and though Colin initially responded without thought, he quickly halted under Yurin's pointed gaze, correcting himself and addressing him with proper respect before leaving. After a short wait, Colin returned with Rayon, and Yurin raised a hand in greeting, only for Rayon to freeze in shock as he took in the drastic change in Yurin's appearance, his taller and sharper presence almost unrecognizable. He cautiously sought confirmation, and Yurin acknowledged him with a calm smile, while Rayon admitted that he'd already heard fragments of recent events from their second brother. Pleased, Yurin suggested returning home, but the shift in Rayon's expression immediately signaled trouble as he revealed that a serious situation had unfolded. The capital had been placed under strict lockdown, allowing entry but forbidding anyone from leaving, and the reason soon followed as he explained that at dawn the previous day, the crown prince had been assassinated. The revelation caused Yurin's composure to falter, his eyes widening, while Colin sought confirmation, only for Rayon to reaffirm the truth, adding that the incident had thrown the entire capital into turmoil. Colin reacted with disbelief, unable to comprehend how such an attack could occur within the heavily fortified royal castle. In that moment, Yurin felt a subtle disturbance and quietly swept his gaze across the area, quickly confirming his suspicion as guards stood stationed everywhere. Their numbers increased and their vigilance unmistakably heightened. The tension in the air was palpable, as if a single unspoken question weighed on everyone present. How such an event could have occurred at all. Rayon stepped closer, lowering his voice as he prepared to reveal a more unsettling detail, explaining that rumors had already begun spreading throughout the empire. He recounted that the crown prince's fiancée, a princess from a neighboring kingdom, had been visiting for several days, and in an effort to impress her, the prince had invited her to the training grounds to showcase his martial prowess. However, just as he approached her following the display, a jagged stone spike erupted from the ground without warning and pierced him through, ending his life instantly despite the desperate response of nearby priests. The account left Colin shaken, unable to understand how such magic could be used within the palace where it was strictly prohibited, while Rayon confirmed that this very impossibility was why the elders of the magic tower had been summoned, as the entire situation had spiraled into chaos, made even more unthinkable by the fact that it occurred in front of the prince's own fiancée. The mention of a stone spear struck Yurin like a jolt, as recognition set in immediately, revealing not only the technique but also the identity behind it, and more disturbingly, the knowledge that this individual was not meant to appear at this point in the story. A creeping sense of dread settled within him, though he forced himself to remain composed, reminding his racing thoughts that he now possessed the heavenly martial body and that both he and the true protagonist still had time to grow stronger, even as uncertainty lingered beneath that reassurance. Regaining focus, Yurin turned his attention to Colin and Rayon, calling out to them, and Colin responded with practiced obedience, adding the respectful title he had been made to use, which left Ron visibly puzzled as he questioned the unusual form of address. Colin reacted with unease, urging him not to dwell on it, and Yurin moved past the exchange, instead asking about the best inns in the area. Rayon named two options, Dragon's Tears and Giant's Oath, and Yurin chose the former without hesitation, deciding it suited his purpose best. He instructed both brothers to secure leave, then proceed to the Magic Tower to submit departure applications for all four of them, confident that the Rock's family name would ensure swift approval, and told them to wait for him at the inn afterward. When Rayon asked about his own plans, Yurin offered only a faint smile, indicating he intended to meet an old acquaintance, and as he departed, he casually reminded them not to trouble Jurnox, a remark that left both brothers momentarily stunned at the idea that he might have friends. Not long after, Yurin arrived before an opulent establishment, observing from the shadows of a nearby alley as he identified it as Flamberge, a bar reserved for nobles and infamous for its reputation. He retrieved the attire he had prepared and stepped out fully dressed in refined noble fashion, perfectly fitting his status, before activating his ring to summon Agnes. Her voice emerged sharply, clearly annoyed at being disturbed, prompting a quick apology as he requested her assistance in altering his appearance. Taken aback, she questioned how he even knew the ring possessed such a function, to which Yurin offered a simple guess, after which she asked whose likeness he intended to assume. At that moment, a nobleman exited the bar, and Yurin immediately chose him as the model. The ring responded by melting into a shimmering substance that spread across his face, erasing his features before reshaping them into an exact replica of the man's appearance. Approaching the entrance, he was met with puzzled guards who remarked that he had only just left, but Yurin dismissed it casually, implying he had returned for more, which earned him easy passage along with a light warning not to overindulge. Inside, he took a seat among the bustling patrons, now passing as Vic Countver, and was promptly recognized by a waiter who welcomed him back, to which Yurin simply requested the same drink he had been having earlier. Only after the waiter departed did Yurin allow himself a quiet breath, relief settling in as he confirmed that his infiltration had succeeded. Drawing in his internal energy, he refined his senses, isolating the overlapping noise until each conversation became distinct, a stream of gossip, complaints, and empty flattery flowing clearly through the air. Among them, one voice caught his attention, a young woman at the bar weeping as she spoke of abandonment, only to reveal that the one she had loved was now dead, her grief spilling out as she confided in the brown-haired bartender. The bartender offered gentle reassurance, suggesting that time and new connections could ease such pain, and though the comfort was simple, she accepted it with quiet gratitude, her emotions gradually settling. Yurin continued to listen, but then a sudden thought took hold, prompting him to act as he used sound transmission to slip his voice directly into her mind, asking whether she had truly cherished her time with the Crown Prince. The reaction was immediate, her shock breaking through as she demanded the source of the voice, and in the very next instant, the atmosphere shifted violently as the entire bar began to tremble. Cracks spread across the ceiling, and the once lively laughter of nobles twisted into panic as the structure gave way, collapsing with a thunderous roar into ruin, the destruction standing in stark contrast to the untouched buildings beside it. Yurin burst out from the wreckage and landed near the entrance, only to be met with a horrifying sight as the girl transformed, stone pillars erupting from the ground and fusing with her body into something grotesque. A system panel appeared before his eyes, identifying her as envy, one of the 7 deadly sins, her intent unmistakably hostile. In that instant, Yurin understood that she was far from human and possessed overwhelming power, and as her voice warped into something filled with hatred, promising his destruction, a surge of fear gripped him. He questioned whether survival was even possible against what stood before him, yet forced himself to remain composed, reminding himself that this very confrontation was the reason he had come. Casting aside his disguise, he revealed his true youthful appearance as the false middle-aged features peeled away, while his focus shifted to the need for a proper weapon. Power gathered in his hand as he briefly noted that once this was over, the apostle's corpse should be recovered and forged into a dagger. Envy watched with growing interest, her eyes gleaming as she took in his transformation, her amusement evident as she recognized his real form and found it unexpectedly pleasing, already deciding that she would capture him alive. Without warning, she surged forward on her stone limbs, her movements violent and predatory as she closed the distance. Yurin reacted instantly, charging to meet her while channeling mana into his dark blade, driving a clean and direct strike toward her chest. The impact rang out sharply, but instead of piercing through, the dagger rebounded off her stone shell without leaving even a scratch, causing his confidence to falter. Realizing the futility of a simple attack, he clenched his jaw and chose to escalate, hurling the dagger forward as he unleashed a black iron explosion. Dark streaks tore through the air as a column of multicolored energy descended upon Envy, engulfing her in a violent blast that momentarily forced Yurin to step back, believing he had ended it. Yet as the flames began to fade, a distorted voice emerged from the smoke, and she stepped out unharmed, her grin widening as she remarked on the curious nature of his power. The sight caused Yurin's breath to catch, the realization settling in that his attack had achieved nothing. Sweat gathered along his brow as the realization set in that he had already exhausted most of his options, leaving him with little room to maneuver. Reaching for a butterfly-shaped talisman, he prepared one of his strongest techniques, a finishing move capable of bringing down an orc warrior in a single strike, and without hesitation, he cast it forward, activating Blood Fire Palm while layering it with a curving shot, unleashing a swirling storm of blazing orange butterflies into the night. The fiery shapes twisted through the air, looping around structures before crashing into Envy's stone limbs, detonating in bursts of searing heat. Yet even as the attack unfolded, a sinking despair took hold within him as he realized he had poured nearly all of his remaining energy into it. The thought of defeat loomed heavily, and instinctively, he turned to retreat, only to find Envy still advancing without a trace of damage. Frustration escaped him as civilians around them descended into panic, fleeing through the wreckage while cries of terror spread at the sight of the monstrous figure. Watching the chaos, Yurin came to a harsh conclusion that escape was no longer an option, as abandoning the fight would only lead to more deaths. And so he steeled himself to endure until the capital's forces could intervene. Envy answered with a barrage of stone spears, their crimson edges slicing through the air as he was forced into constant motion, dodging one strike after another. Yet he quickly understood that evasion alone would only delay the inevitable. Though his mastery was incomplete, he resolved to rely on his blade, drawing a long sword that caught the moonlight with a faint glow as he poured his inner energy into it and surged forward. Envy reacted with another wave of attacks, but this time he met them directly, his blade cutting through the incoming spears one after another, shards of stone crashing around him as he pressed onward. A grin broke through the dust as he recognized that if he could break her attacks, then he still had a chance. From across the shattered plaza, Envy observed him from atop her stone limbs, clearly entertained, and as another storm of spears descended, the battle only intensified. Yurin steadied his stance and lifted his sword, bracing himself as a growing sense of alarm set in when he noticed the number of incoming projectiles steadily increasing. Envy's laughter rang out as she unleashed another relentless volley, clearly amused as she pressed him to try and withstand it. Yet her taunt faltered midway as her body suddenly stiffened, her voice breaking with confusion as something began to go wrong. At that instant, system windows flashed before Yurin's eyes, revealing what had been unfolding beneath the surface, his attacks having laced her with multiple layers of poison throughout the battle. The notifications confirmed that extended poison had taken effect, blood venom art had triggered a snake-type toxin, and fire flame poison was now burning within her, causing her form to convulse violently. A surge of triumph ignited within him at the sight of her finally reacting, but another alert quickly followed, stating that paralysis had been inflicted for only a single second, a realization that sent a spike of urgency through him. Though the window was painfully short, he knew he could not afford to hesitate, immediately activating Small Dragon's treasure as golden energy flared around his body, enhancing his speed and strength. He launched himself forward toward the immobilized apostle, closing the distance in an instant as Envy's eyes widened, and even as a message indicated the paralysis had ended, Yurin was already mid-strike, forcing himself to act before she could recover. His blade cut through her torso in a glowing arc, cracking apart the stone shell, and in the same motion, he drove his dagger into the exposed gap before unleashing another black iron explosion, channeling every remaining trace of his magic into the attack. The detonation erupted from within her, tearing through the surroundings in a violent burst of flame, stone, and dust that shook the street apart. When the chaos subsided, Yurin remained standing only by leaning against his sword, his breathing heavy as he convinced himself that the strike had finally connected. His gaze fixed on the fallen form, searching for any sign of movement, but the rubble soon shifted, and from within the shattered remains, a slick mass of raw flesh began to pull itself free. Yurin recoiled instinctively, disbelief catching in his throat as the exposed core lifted itself upright, pulsing with dark blue-black energy while flames coiled around it, and a distorted voice emerged from within, urging him to wait. Horror crept through him as he watched, struggling to accept what he was seeing, until a forgotten realization surfaced in his mind. A chilling realization struck him as he remembered that apostles did not fall so easily, their existence defined by multiple phases, and almost immediately, a warning window flared before his eyes, announcing that Envy was awakening into a second phase, each transformation amplifying her power to a terrifying degree. In the next instant, a new stone body erupted from the shattered remains, her voice rising with distorted intensity as she declared her next form, her heavy limbs crashing into the ground with crushing force before she unleashed another attack. Projectiles edged with shifting colors tore violently across the plaza, forcing Yurin to react with a strained groan as he realized the attacks had become faster, more erratic, and far harder to predict. He dashed across broken stone, narrowly avoiding the relentless barrage as spears carved through the air behind him, his jaw tightening as the grim thought surfaced that at this rate, survival was slipping away. Another streak of deadly force rushed toward him, his eyes widening as the world blurred into flashes of red, the night seeming to drown in chaos as he twisted aside, just in time, the spears ripping past with brutal force. Each strike came faster than the last, stripped of any pattern he could rely on, and though he managed to cut down a few, his movements grew desperate and unsteady. Deep down, he understood the truth he tried to deny, that he could not keep up for long. A spear he never even sensed sliced dangerously close, the cold edge brushing past as darkness flickered across his vision, and though instinct forced him aside at the last possible moment, the attack still grazed his shoulder, sending sharp pain through his body. Staggering back, he created distance, gripping his sword tightly as the realization hit him with full force that he had come within a breath of death. Fear surged through him, overwhelming everything else, and he turned to run, his thoughts consumed by the need to survive as the slightest mistake now meant certain death. The moment he tried to escape, fury erupted behind him, the creature's presence intensifying as another massive spear slammed down ahead, shattering the ground and halting his path. Before he could react, another burst upward beneath his feet, forcing him into a desperate leap, barely clearing it as his footing faltered, and as he landed, yet another strike tore past him, driving him to dive away with a strained effort just to stay alive. He barely found a moment to breathe before another relentless barrage descended upon him, forcing him to grit his teeth and turn back toward her with a strained, guttural cry rising from his chest. Yet just as suddenly as it began, the assault ceased. A low, cruel laugh echoed through the ruined space as she watched him, clearly pleased, her expression twisting into something mocking as she challenged the very idea that escape was even possible. His thoughts tangled in frustration while she urged him to struggle as much as he wished, drawing nothing from him but a bitter curse as her presence seemed to tighten its grip over the city. Elsewhere, beneath the darkened sky, a cloaked woman moved alone with calm, steady steps despite the growing chaos, distant shouts breaking the stillness as panicked voices called for guards, warning of a monstrous presence. The commotion caught her attention, and ahead, a group of men argued in fear, one demanding clarity while another struggled to explain that a creature covered in stone spears had appeared in the southern district. She listened in silence, her expression hardening as the name formed clearly in her mind. Envy, a realization she immediately rejected as impossible. The men continued in confusion, one doubting the claim while the other insisted it was real, their fear escalating as they began to speculate about the crown prince, only for their words to die abruptly as the cloaked woman vanished in an instant, leaving one of them crying out in shock. She reappeared atop a tall structure, her gaze sweeping across the city until distant flashes of violent light and rolling thunder drew her focus, marking the exact location. Without hesitation, she leapt forward, her movement briefly revealing the intricate marking along her body before she disappeared once more into the night. Back within the shattered streets, Yurin continued to evade the unrelenting attacks, each failed attempt only feeding Envy's growing irritation, which soon twisted into a satisfied grin as she resolved to end the fight. With lethal intent, she launched another spear, faster than any before, and as multiple strikes closed in at once, Yurin tightened his grip, his breath faltering as fear and fury clashed violently within him. A single thought gripped him as the spears closed in from every direction, too fast to outrun, and he wondered if this was the moment his life would end, his body locking in place under the weight of it. Then a system window burst into view, declaring a true life-or-death crisis and unlocking two special privileges, the first announcing that Heavenly I had evolved into Creator's Gaze, granting him the ability to perceive attack trajectories. Shock flashed across Yurin's face as the world seemed to shift, the incoming spears slowing in his vision, their paths burning with absolute clarity through his mind. Instinct took over as he stepped aside from the first strike with effortless precision, then avoided another, quickly realizing that once their paths were revealed, evasion became almost trivial. Even when two spears twisted toward him in a deceptive pattern, their trick collapsed instantly under his gaze, allowing him to slip through with minimal movement, and a breathless grin formed as he understood the potential of this power. Envy's frustration surged at the sight, her fury intensifying as the system flared again, unveiling the second privilege, the realm of ascension, a time-limited state triggered at the brink of death. Power surged violently through Yurin's body, his inner strength reaching its peak as white energy gathered along his blade, igniting it with a radiant glow. For a brief moment, he questioned its nature, but the thought vanished just as quickly, replaced by certainty that it was enough. Across the ruined street, a mother and child watched from a window, the child clinging to her sleeve with wide eyes as Yurin raised his luminous sword, appearing like a figure of light amid destruction. Envy struck first, but Yurin moved at the same instant, his body surging forward with explosive speed, tearing through her barrage and closing the distance in a flash that distorted the air itself. Panic flickered across Envy's face as she faltered, her voice breaking in disbelief as though confronted by something impossible, while Yurin hovered before her, his presence cold and unyielding. With everything he had left, he brought the blade down in a blinding arc, forcing the strike through her body with overwhelming force as if demanding she endure it. And the impact tore clean through her form, severing her head as a surge of white energy exploded outward, ripping apart what remained of the battlefield. From a distant window, the mother and child could only stare in stunned silence, the child whispering in awe that the light had defeated the monster, while Yurin stood alone amid the wreckage, his body trembling, sweat pouring down as his breath came in ragged bursts. He questioned whether it was truly over, but the system flickered before him, informing him that his power and stamina had been completely drained, forcing him to exhale sharply as he realized survival had only been possible because of the privileges activating at the last moment. His thoughts shifted toward escape before the guards arrived, urging his exhausted body to move, but the air suddenly changed, sending a sharp warning through his senses as he turned and froze. Dark energy twisted nearby, gathering and condensing with unnatural force, and the realization struck him instantly as the remains began to move, reforming at a terrifying speed. A warning flashed again, declaring that envy had entered Phase 3, the final form now manifesting, and Yurin could only watch as a new head took shape, her presence returning even more violently. She snarled with raw intensity, her voice filled with excitement as she made it clear he would not escape again, and Yurin felt a crushing weight settle in his chest, knowing there was nothing left for him to give. Worse still, a fleeting thought surfaced that he had not even managed to settle what he owed, making the situation feel even more final. Envy's fury erupted as her body expanded, rising above the ruins like something monstrous and unstoppable, her broken voice repeating a vow to destroy everything as dark energy pulsed across her massive form. Yurin stared up in disbelief, her sheer size alone enough to shatter his resolve, his mind falling empty as he realized his strength was completely gone, leaving him to question whether this truly marked his end. A stone spear shot toward him and halted just inches from his face, yet he lacked even the strength to react, standing frozen as fear rooted him in place and death felt inevitable, until suddenly, Envy's body jerked violently. A sudden force tore Envy backward, halting the attack mid-strike as she snarled in frustration, her fury turning outward as she struggled against the unseen restraint. The bindings tightened, alive and unyielding, coiling around her limbs, sealing her mouth, and locking down the countless stone spears that had filled the air. Behind her stood the cloaked woman from earlier, composed and steady as she controlled the restraints with effortless precision. Recognition flared in Envy's eyes as she fought against the hold, her muffled rage spilling over as she tried to demand answers, unable to understand why she was being stopped. The woman responded sharply, calling her by name and issuing a firm command to stand down, her tone laced with lethal intent as she made it clear this was not the time for them to reveal themselves. Watching the scene unfold, Yurin immediately recognized her as she dragged Envy across the rooftop, the latter still thrashing in resistance. A quiet realization surfaced in his mind as he recalled encountering that same presence after leaving the Divine Dragon Palace, and moments later, a system window appeared, identifying her as another of the 7 deadly sins, lust, a revelation that he repeated silently in disbelief. As if sensing his gaze, Lust paused and turned toward him, her eyes cold and unreadable, deepening his confusion as he tried to understand the situation. If they were not meant to reveal themselves, then their retreat made sense. And without another word, she turned away, tightening the restraints further before deciding it was time to leave, dragging Envy with her as she leapt from the building and vanished into the night. Yurin remained still for a moment, watching them disappear before finally releasing a shaky breath, the weight of survival settling over him. The sound of approaching guards snapped him back to reality, and knowing that remaining would only bring complications, he slipped into the shadows of a nearby alley, avoiding notice until the night gave way to morning.